He didn't beg. He didn't argue. He didn't even raise his voice. When Victoria Bennett slid that termination letter across her desk and told Logan Hayes his services were no longer needed, he simply looked at it for a long moment, the way a man looks at something he always feared was coming but hoped would never arrive. Then he folded it once, tucked it under his arm, and said, "Thank you for the opportunity." Just that. Nothing more. And somehow those 5 words hit Victoria harder than any argument ever could have. She just didn't know it yet. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. If it moves you, hit that like button and stay until the very end. This one is worth it. The alarm didn't wake Logan Hayes on a Tuesday morning in early October. Emma did. She was standing beside his bed in the darkness, holding a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Buttons by one threadbare ear, her hair tangled from sleep, her eyes wide with the specific urgency that only 5-year-olds possess at 6:47 in the morning. "Daddy?" she whispered. Not loudly. She never had to say it loudly. Somehow, even in the deepest sleep, Logan's brain had been rewired over the past 2 years to respond to that particular frequency. His eyes opened before he was fully conscious. "Yeah, Bug," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "I had the dream again." He sat up immediately. The dream again meant the one where she was falling, the one that had started about 8 months after her mother left. After Sarah packed 2 suitcases and a box of books and drove away from their apartment in South Crestwood without looking back. Emma never talked about the dream in detail. She just called it the dream, and Logan had learned not to push for more than she was ready to give. "Come here," he said, and lifted the blanket. She climbed in beside him, tucking herself against his side the way she had since she was a baby, her small feet cold against his leg, Mr. Buttons wedged between them. "Do you want to tell me about it?" he asked. A long pause. Outside, the first gray light of morning was beginning to press against the curtains. A garbage truck rumbled somewhere down the block. "I was falling," she said finally, "and you were trying to catch me, but you couldn't reach." He pulled her closer. "I would always reach. But in the dream, you couldn't." "Dreams lie," he said. "You know that. Remember what we talked about? That dreams are just your brain making stuff up when it's bored?" "Exactly. Your brain gets bored in the middle of the night and starts writing really bad stories. You'd write a better story than that." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I would make it so you could fly." "There you go. Now that's a good story." She relaxed against him slowly, the way a clenched fist slowly opens. He lay there staring at the ceiling, doing the math in his head. He needed to be at the office by 9. Emma needed to be at Sunshine Valley Daycare by 8:15. The drive from his apartment to the daycare was 20 minutes. From the daycare to the Hartwell Realty offices in downtown Marcellus was another 35-40 on a bad traffic morning, which meant he needed to be out of this apartment, fed, dressed, Emma's bag packed, her lunch made, by 7:30 at the absolute latest. He looked at the clock. 6:51. It was going to be close. It was always close. Logan Hayes had not planned on becoming a single father. Nobody plans that. You plan a life with someone, and then the life changes shape underneath your feet, and you either adapt or you fall. And Logan had decided, quietly, without fanfare, without anyone around to applaud the decision, that he was going to adapt. He was 32. He had a degree in business administration from a mid-tier state school, a decent work ethic, and a specific kind of stubborn competence that his supervisor at Hartwell Realty had recognized early and rewarded steadily. He had been with the company for 4 years. He had started as a junior analyst, then moved to property development coordination, and for the last year and a half had been the lead coordinator on several of Hartwell's mid-size residential projects. He was good at his job. He knew it, not in an arrogant way, but in the way a carpenter knows he can build a table that won't wobble. He just knew. What he didn't have was a support system. His mother was in Phoenix battling a hip that needed replacing and a landlord who was making her life difficult. His father had been out of the picture since Logan was 12. He had friends, good ones, the kind who showed up. But they had their own jobs, their own families, their own complicated mornings. He couldn't call Marcus at 6:55 on a Tuesday and ask him to come hold things together while Logan got to work on time. So Logan held things together himself. every single morning. Most mornings, he managed. By 7:49, they were out the door. Already late. He knew it. He didn't say it out loud because Emma could read tension the way some kids read picture books, quickly and accurately, and the last thing he needed was for her to feel responsible. "Can we listen to the dinosaur song?" she asked from the back seat, buckling herself with the focused concentration of someone performing surgery. "We can listen to whatever you want." "Even if it gets stuck in your head?" "Even then," she grinned. She had a gap in her front teeth from where her first baby tooth had come out 3 weeks ago. She'd been enormously proud of that gap, had shown it to the cashier at the grocery store, to the mailman, to a stranger's dog outside the pharmacy. The tooth had been placed in a small ceramic box shaped like a cloud, which now lived on her dresser beside Mr. Button's. The dinosaur song began. It was some kind of cheerful, aggressive children's pop thing about a T-Rex who was also apparently afraid of thunderstorms. And Logan drove through the morning traffic, one hand on the wheel, half his mind on the route, and the other half running through the day ahead. He had a project review at 10, a call with a contractor at 11:30, a site assessment report due by end of day. Normal things, manageable things. If he could just get Emma dropped off without incident and make it downtown before 9:30, he could probably salvage the morning. They hit the detour on Fairfield Avenue. A water main had broken overnight. The whole block was closed off. Police tape, orange cones, a crew of workers standing around a hole in the street that looked like the earth had simply given up and collapsed. Logan sat in the line of redirected traffic for 11 minutes, watching the clock on the dashboard, feeling the slow burn of a morning sliding sideways. Emma, unaware of any of this, sang along with the dinosaur song. He dropped her off at Sunshine Valley at 8:41. Ms. Patterson, the daycare supervisor, met them at the door. She was a compact woman in her 50s with reading glasses perpetually pushed up into her silver hair and an expression of permanent, gentle competence. She had been running Sunshine Valley for 19 years and had the particular steadiness of someone who has spent 2 decades convincing small humans that the world is, fundamentally, okay. "Emma," she said, as if Emma's arrival was the best news she'd received all week. Emma immediately launched into an explanation of the dream and the dinosaur song, and a theory she had developed about why Mr. Buttons had one ear longer than the other, and Ms. Patterson absorbed all of this without losing a beat. Logan crouched down to Emma's level. "Hey, Bug, look at me." Emma turned from Ms. Patterson and looked at him with those serious brown eyes that still sometimes stopped him cold because they were Sarah's eyes, the one thing his daughter had inherited from her mother that he couldn't pretend away. "Have a good day," he said. "I'll be here at pickup, okay?" "Okay," she said. Then, as an afterthought, "Daddy, you forgot to pack the crackers I like." "I know. I'll pack them tonight." "The round ones, not the square ones." "The round ones, got it." "The square ones hurt the top of my mouth." "Emma." Okay. She reached forward and hugged him with her full body weight, the way she always hugged. Not a polite side hug, but a full commitment, both arms, face buried in shoulder hug. And for 1 second, just one, Logan closed his eyes and held on. Then he stood, nodded to Ms. Patterson, and walked back to his car. He got to the Hartwell Realty offices at 9:22. Victoria Bennett had been awake since 5:15. This was not unusual. This was, in fact, the rhythm of her life. Up before the city, coffee made, laptop open, inbox managed. She had built this habit during her first year as CEO of Hartwell Realty, when the company was hemorrhaging 2 mid-tier managers, and she was essentially doing the work of 4 people. The habit had stuck even after she'd staffed up properly, because by then she'd realized that the early morning hours were the only time the building was truly quiet, the only time she could think in something longer than 15-minute increments. Victoria was 30 years old. She had become CEO of Hartwell 18 months ago, which meant she had spent 18 months being underestimated in meetings by people who had been in real estate for longer than she'd been alive. She had learned to use that underestimation strategically. She let people think she was young. She let them think she was still figuring things out. And then she delivered results that made the board stop asking questions and start asking for her opinion. She was effective. She knew it, not with arrogance, but with the calm certainty of someone who has tested herself under pressure and found she doesn't crack. What she was not, had never claimed to be, was good at the soft parts of leadership. She could read a balance sheet in the time it took most people to find a pen. She could identify a problem in a project timeline 3 stages before it became critical. She was direct, decisive, and consistently about 15 minutes ahead of the people around her in any conversation about strategy. But the human stuff, the reading between the lines, the understanding of what was happening in someone's personal life, that had never been her instinct. She dealt in information she could verify. She trusted data over narrative. Feelings were fine, but feelings didn't show up in a quarterly report. This was not something she thought of as a flaw. It was simply how she was built. That morning, she arrived at the office at 6:50 with a large black coffee and a manila folder containing a printed attendance record. The name on the file was Logan Hayes. She had been watching the attendance problem for 6 weeks. The first late arrival had been in mid-August, 23 minutes past 9. She'd noted it, filed it, said nothing. People had bad mornings, cars broke down. The second had been in early September, 31 minutes late. She'd asked his direct supervisor, Dana Frost, to have a quiet word. Dana had done so, and Logan had nodded and said it wouldn't happen again. The third was last Friday, 47 minutes late. No email, no advance notice. He'd simply walked in at 9:47, sat down at his desk, and opened his laptop. Victoria had watched through the glass wall of her office. She had a policy. It existed for a reason. The company was in a growth phase, managing 3 major residential developments simultaneously, and she needed people who showed up. Not some days, not most days, every day. Dependability was not optional, it was foundational. She opened the folder, reviewed the dates, the times, the duration of each late arrival. 3 incidents in 6 weeks. According to Hartwell's attendance policy that was documented, that every employee had signed at onboarding, 3 documented late arrivals without pre-approved accommodation constituted grounds for termination. She was not happy about this. She didn't want to lose a competent employee. But the policy was the policy, and if she made exceptions, then the policy became meaningless. And if the policy became meaningless, the whole framework started to unravel. She had learned this lesson early and learned it hard. The moment you let one person slide, 5 others notice. The moment 5 others notice, you have a culture problem. The moment you have a culture problem, you have a company problem. So she typed the letter herself. It took her less than 8 minutes. She kept it factual, professional, humane in tone. She included information about final paycheck timeline and benefits continuation. She reread it once, found nothing she wanted to change, and printed it. Then she placed it in the center of her desk and sat back and drank her coffee in the silence of the early morning office, looking at it. She didn't feel good, but she was not in the business of making decisions that felt good. She was in the business of making decisions that were right. She was almost entirely sure this was one of them. Logan heard the murmur before he'd even fully settled into his chair. In an open-plan office, word travels fast and sideways, and he caught it in fragments. A glance from Priya at the adjacent desk, a low exchange between 2 account managers near the coffee station, Dana Frost's eyes flicking to him and then quickly away. He'd learned to read those signals over 4 years in the same building. Something was moving through the office this morning, and it was moving in his direction. He pulled up his email. Nothing extraordinary. A message from the contractor on the Kensington project. A note from the city permitting office. A calendar reminder for the 10 o'clock review. He was halfway through reading the contractor's email when Dana appeared at his elbow. "Victoria wants to see you," she said. She kept her voice flat, professional, but something in her posture was off. Too careful, too contained. Her office. "When you have a moment." "Now?" he asked. "Sooner than that, I think." He looked at her for a moment. Dana was 46, a 12-year Hartwell veteran, a woman who had survived 3 different ownership transitions without losing her composure or her institutional memory. She was not prone to exaggeration or drama. If she was standing at his desk with that expression, it meant something specific. "Okay," he said. He saved his work, stood, straightened his jacket out of habit, and walked toward the glass-walled office at the end of the floor. Victoria was standing when he came in, which surprised him. Most of his interactions with her had been in meetings, seated, formal, structured. She was at the window looking out over the downtown skyline, holding a coffee mug with both hands. She turned when he knocked on the open door. "Logan, come in. Close the door." He did. He noticed the envelope on the desk, but didn't let his eyes stay on it. She didn't gesture for him to sit, which was a small thing, but Logan Hayes had always been good at reading small things. "I'll be direct with you," she said. She set the mug down and picked up the envelope. "You've been late 3 times in the last 6 weeks. You know our attendance policy." "I do," he said. "I've given this a significant amount of thought." She held out the envelope. "This is a notice of termination, effective end of business today. You'll receive your full final paycheck, and your current benefits will continue through the end of the month. HR will be in touch about the formal offboarding process." Silence. Logan looked at the envelope. Then he looked at her face, which was composed and direct and clearly bracing for a reaction. He understood, in that moment, exactly what kind of reaction she was bracing for. Argument, negotiation, the list of reasons, the appeal to his track record and his project results in his 4 years of showing up. He understood that she had a counter-response prepared for each of those, because she was that kind of person, the kind who war games these conversations before they happen. He didn't give her any of it. He took the envelope. "Okay," he said. She blinked, just once, barely perceptibly, but he caught it. "I appreciate the honesty," he said, "and I appreciate the time here. This company gave me a real opportunity, and I took it seriously." He paused, not for effect, just because he meant what he was about to say next, and he wanted to mean it all the way through before he said it. "I understand your position. I hope the next person in this role does good work." Victoria's jaw was set, controlled, but something shifted behind her eyes, something that wasn't quite certainty anymore. "Thank you for your contributions, Logan," she said. "Take care of yourself," he said, and then he walked out, pulling the door closed gently behind him. He didn't make a scene. He had decided he wasn't going to make a scene before he even walked into her office, not because he was passive, not because he didn't feel the shock moving through him in slow waves, but because there was something in him, some deep structural part of who he was, that refused to let a hard moment make him into someone he wasn't. He went back to his desk. Dana was still nearby, pretending to sort through a stack of folders that didn't need sorting. Priya had found something very interesting to study on her monitor. The account managers at the coffee station had dissolved back to their desks. Logan opened his desk drawer and found a reusable grocery bag he kept there, the kind with the reinforced bottom. He placed into it a framed photo of Emma from her 4th birthday, grinning and covered in frosting, a spare phone charger, 2 protein bars he'd forgotten about, a mechanical pencil he particularly liked, the kind with the weighted barrel, a small notebook, half full of project notes in his cramped, precise handwriting. He looked at the notebook for a moment, then decided to leave it. The project notes belonged to the project. He closed the drawer, picked up the bag. "Hey!" It was Priya, low and genuine, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. She was 27, sharp, one of the better analysts in the department. "I'm sorry. For whatever it's worth, this doesn't make sense to me." "Thank you," he said, and meant it. He shook hands with 3 people on his way to the elevator, not because he was performing graciousness, but because he'd worked alongside these people for years, and they deserved a real goodbye. Marcus from IT, who had fixed his computer more times than Logan could count. Donna at reception, who always had coffee made when he arrived. Old Arthur from accounting, who was 71 and had no plans to retire, and who called everyone son regardless of age or gender. "Take care, son," Arthur said, shaking his hand with both of his. "You too, Arthur." The elevator doors opened. Logan stepped in. He pressed the lobby button. The doors closed. And in the 4 seconds it took to descend 1 floor, before anyone could see it, and before the professional composure he'd maintained for the last 40 minutes could make any false promises about how he actually felt, Logan Hayes pressed his back against the elevator wall, tilted his head back, and breathed through the hit of it. Just breathed. Not for long. The lobby was coming. He straightened up, pushed off the wall, adjusted the bag on his shoulder. The doors opened. He walked out into the morning. He didn't go straight to the car. He needed 10 minutes of open air before he trusted himself to drive, so he walked half a block down Jefferson Street and found a bench beside a concrete planter that somebody had filled with late-season mums, orange and yellow and rust-colored, the flowers that came out when everything else was dying down. He sat down and put the grocery bag between his feet and looked at the street. The city moved around him. Delivery trucks. A woman walking 2 dogs, one enormous, one tiny, both straining at their separate leashes with total conviction. A bike messenger cutting between cars with the serene confidence of someone who has made his peace with mortality. Normal Tuesday morning things. The world carrying on. Logan thought about money. Specifically, he thought about the math. He had savings. Not comfortable savings, not I can take 6 months and find myself savings, but functional savings, the kind that bought you time if you were careful. 6 weeks, maybe 8. He had rent due on the 1st, Emma's daycare fees, groceries, his mother's birthday in November, which he'd planned to mark with a plane ticket to Phoenix because she couldn't make the trip, and Emma hadn't seen her grandmother in almost a year. He would figure it out. He always figured it out. But sitting there, on that bench beside the dying mums, he was allowed to feel the weight of it for a few minutes before he picked it back up. He thought about Emma, about the dream she'd had that morning, the one where she was falling and he couldn't reach. He thought about how she'd said it so plainly, without accusation, just as a fact. You couldn't reach. And how he'd told her that dreams lie. He sat with that for a moment. Then he pulled out his phone and looked at the photo he'd taken of her last week. She'd been sitting on the kitchen counter while he made dinner, banging 2 wooden spoons together, completely absorbed in the rhythm she was creating, her head tilted to one side, and she'd looked up right when he took the picture, and her expression was one of pure, uncomplicated joy, the kind of joy that doesn't know yet what it costs to maintain. He looked at that photo for a long time. Then he put his phone away, picked up the grocery bag, and walked back to his car. The meeting lasted 6 minutes. Victoria had tracked it afterward. Not because she was proud of the duration, but because she tracked most things that passed through her day. She was precise about time, the way some people are precise about money, treating every minute as a unit of something finite and non-renewable. 6 minutes to end a 4-year employment. She was aware that other people might find that cold. She found it merciful. The longer these conversations went, the more room there was for things to get messy, for emotions to escalate, for someone to say something that couldn't be unsaid. Logan Hayes had been so collected that for a moment she'd wondered if she'd misread the situation. Maybe this didn't matter to him. Maybe he'd been planning to leave anyway. Maybe she'd been worried for nothing. Then she thought about the way he'd looked at the envelope, that single beat of stillness before he reached out and took it. That was not the reaction of a man who didn't care. That was the reaction of a man who had made a decision about how he was going to behave regardless of how he felt, and those were actually 2 very different things. She went back to work. There was a land acquisition review at 11, a budget call with the board at 2, a site inspection she needed to prepare notes for by Thursday. She had work to do, and she was going to do it because that was what you did, and the attendance policy existed for a reason. She said this to herself a few more times than she normally would have needed to. She was reviewing the acquisition documents when Dana Frost knocked and entered without waiting. "Anything else you need on the Hayes transition?" Dana asked. Her tone was professionally neutral in the way that professional neutrality sometimes communicates something it isn't actually supposed to communicate. "HR's handling it," Victoria said without looking up. A pause. "He just left," Dana said. "He didn't make any noise about it." Victoria looked up then. "I didn't expect him to." 4 years. Good work. I just want to make sure that's on the record somewhere." "It's in his file, Dana." "Right." Dana nodded. "Good." She left. Victoria went back to the acquisition documents. She told herself she felt fine. She worked on telling herself that for the rest of the morning. At 12:30, Victoria got a text from the front desk at Rosewood Academy, her daughter Sophie's school. It was the kind of text that arrived about twice a month in one form or another. "Hi, just a reminder that the permission slip for the October field trip was due today. Sophie says she may have left it at home?" Victoria closed her eyes. Sophie was 8. She was organized in some ways. Meticulous about her art projects, borderline obsessive about making sure her school bag was packed before bed, but permission slips had a specific and reliable way of disappearing between home and school, turning up a week later tucked inside a library book or wedged under the back seat of the car. Victoria had signed the permission slip last Thursday. She was almost certain it was on the kitchen counter. She left the office at 12:45, drove home in 12 minutes, found the slip exactly where she'd expected it, under a coffee mug, because of course, and was back on the road to Rosewood Academy by 1 o'clock, which meant she was cutting through the Fairfield district rather than taking the highway, because at 1 on a Tuesday the surface streets were faster if you knew which turns to take. She knew which turns to take. She was stopped at the light at Fairfield and Maple, running through her afternoon schedule in her head, when something on the sidewalk to her right registered at the edge of her peripheral vision. She turned and stopped thinking about her afternoon schedule. Logan Hayes was walking along the sidewalk on the east side of Maple Street, and he was not alone. There was a small girl beside him, holding his hand. She was 5, maybe 6. Hard to tell from this distance, but small, the way children are small when they're new to the world and haven't quite grown into the space they're going to occupy. She had her hair in 2 uneven pigtails, one higher than the other, and she was wearing a yellow jacket that was maybe half a size too big for her, the sleeves coming down past her wrists. She was talking. Victoria couldn't hear the words. She was in the car, windows up, lights still red, but she could see the motion of it, the way the girl was talking with her whole body, turning slightly toward Logan as she walked, gesturing with her free hand, her face animated with whatever point she was making. Emphatic, earnest, completely convinced of the importance of what she was saying. Logan wasn't looking at his phone, wasn't scanning ahead. He was looking down at the girl, listening, nodding slowly. He said something. The girl laughed. Her whole body laughed, a pure, full-body thing, and then launched back into whatever she'd been saying. Victoria watched this for a moment. Just the two of them on the sidewalk. A yellow jacket with 2 long sleeves, an uneven pigtail. A man who had 3 hours earlier taken a termination letter and said thank you for the opportunity. The light turned green. Victoria didn't move. The car behind her honked, and she pulled forward, and the image receded in her rear-view mirror. Logan and the girl, still walking, still talking, getting smaller. And then she turned on Maple, and they were gone. She drove 2 more blocks toward Rosewood Academy before she pulled over. She sat there with the engine running, the permission slip on the passenger seat, and something moving through her that she didn't have an immediate name for. Not guilt, exactly. Not yet. Something earlier than guilt. Something that arrived before guilt, that was less specific and more unsettling. The sensation of a picture coming into focus when you thought you'd already seen it clearly. A child. He had a child. She had never asked. It had never come up. Hartwell's files contained only what employees chose to disclose, and Logan Hayes had not disclosed a dependent. He had no pre-approved childcare accommodation on record. He had simply arrived late, 3 times, and she had applied the policy. And now she was sitting half a block from her daughter's school, holding a permission slip for a field trip to a science museum, thinking about a yellow jacket with 2 long sleeves and a laugh that took over an entire small body. She sat there for a while. Then she pulled back into traffic, delivered the permission slip, exchanged 3 sentences with the front desk about Sophie's upcoming parent-teacher conference, walked back to her car, and drove back toward the office. But on the way, she made a different turn. She found them at the end of the block. The daycare was a converted Victorian house, painted yellow, with a small fenced yard where 3 children were currently staging what appeared to be a complicated disagreement over a tricycle. A handmade banner above the door read, Sunshine Valley. Early Learning Center in bright, slightly uneven letters that had clearly been painted by the children themselves. Logan was crouched down outside the front gate, level with the girl. Emma, Victoria would later learn Emma, helping her with the zipper on her jacket, which appeared to have gotten stuck. Emma was holding Mr. Buttons by one ear with the focused patience of someone who has been through zipper trouble before and knows it requires waiting out. Victoria pulled to the curb and stopped. She wasn't going to get out. She didn't have a plan. She had followed some impulse she hadn't fully examined yet, driven by that thing earlier than guilt, And now she was sitting here watching a man she had fired 3 hours ago fix his daughter's zipper in front of a yellow Victorian house. The zipper came free. Emma inspected her jacket, deemed it acceptable, and said something that made Logan laugh. A real laugh, short and genuine, surprised out of him. Then Emma reached up and took his face in both small hands, the way children sometimes do when they want you to look directly at them and nowhere else, and said something with great seriousness. Logan nodded, said something back, kissed her on the forehead, stood up, took her hand, and they walked together through the gate. Victoria sat in her car for a long moment after they disappeared inside. Then she drove back to the office. She had some things to think about. She pulled Logan's full file at 2:15 between the board call and the site inspection prep. Not the attendance record, the whole file. 4 years of performance reviews, project assessments, email feedback from contractors, subcontractors, clients, a commendation from the city planning office, specifically naming Logan after a particularly complicated permitting process on the Riverbend residential development had gone smoothly. Notes from Dana Frost. Notes from the 2 project managers who had supervised him before he moved into the lead coordinator role. She read all of it. It took 40 minutes. She was the kind of reader who could move through documents quickly while retaining everything, a skill that had been useful throughout her career. She read Logan's file with the same speed and focus she brought to a balance sheet or an acquisition proposal. What she found was not what she had been expecting, which was a solid but unremarkable record with a few bright spots. What she found was exceptional, not flashy. Logan Hayes didn't generate the kind of work that announced itself. He didn't send follow-up emails drawing attention to the thing he'd just fixed. He didn't lobby for credit in meetings. But in project after project, there was a consistent fingerprint. Problems anticipated before they became crises, contractor relationships managed with a steadiness that kept timelines intact, client communications that were honest about complications without catastrophizing them, solutions that were creative without being reckless. The Kensington project, the one currently on her desk, had been under-resourced since August. She'd known it. She'd flagged it as a concern and asked Dana to keep an eye on it. What she hadn't known, because it wasn't in any status report, was that Logan had been quietly bridging the resource gap himself, working with 2 contractors who were doubling up on responsibilities, reconfiguring the work schedule in a way that would add 3 weeks to the timeline on paper, but prevent the kind of costly mistake that could add months. She found this out from a note in the file from one of the contractors. Not an official communication, just a quick email to Dana that had been filed. Just want to flag that Logan's been doing a great job holding this thing together. We're short 2 people and he's made it work. Good one. Victoria sat back in her chair. She thought about the attendance record. 3 late arrivals in 6 weeks. She thought about the girl in the yellow jacket, the uneven pigtails, the stuck zipper, the small hands holding a stuffed rabbit by the ear. She thought about her own morning, the permission slip text, the 12-minute drive home, the slip under the coffee mug, the cut through the Fairfield district. All of that was routine for her. It barely registered as a complication because she had the infrastructure to absorb it. A housekeeper twice a week, a neighbor she trusted with an emergency key, a school with flexible drop-off times, a company she ran and therefore a schedule she controlled. Logan had none of that. Logan had a 5-year-old in a grocery bag and an alarm clock and math that didn't always add up. And he had never said a word about it. He had just come in late 3 times in 6 weeks and said thank you for the opportunity when she fired him for it. Victoria Bennett, who prided herself on dealing in information she could verify, who trusted data over narrative, who had built an entire professional identity on the clarity of her judgment, sat in her office at 4 in the afternoon and acknowledged, with the specific discomfort of someone not accustomed to it, that she had made a mistake. Not because she'd applied the policy wrong, because she had read the numbers and missed the story entirely. She picked up the phone and called Dana. "The Hayes situation," she said. "Yeah," Dana said. "I need his current contact information." A pause. "Okay." "And Dana, I need you to tell me honestly. Did you know about the daughter?" A longer pause this time. "I knew he was dealing with something," Dana said carefully. "He never told me specifics. I assumed it was personal." "Why didn't you tell me?" "I tried to. Dana's voice was quiet. "After the second incident, I said he was dealing with something. You said the policy was clear." Victoria was quiet. "You're right," she said. "You did." She hung up. She looked out the window at the downtown skyline, which was turning gold in the late afternoon light, the buildings going amber and copper, the way buildings do when the day is almost done. She had work to do, different work than she'd planned, but work she needed to do right. By 5:30, she had Logan's number. She sat with her phone in her hand for a moment, not hesitating exactly, but measuring the call before she made it. She was aware that a wrong opening could put him on the defensive, and she didn't want that. She wanted a conversation, and to have a conversation, she needed him to believe she was genuinely asking rather than managing. She dialed. It rang 3 times. Then, "Hello?" His voice was careful. He knew it would be someone from Hartwell. Why else would a number he didn't recognize call at 5:30 on the day he was fired? "Logan, this is Victoria Bennett." A beat. "Ms. Bennett, I need to ask you something," she said, "and I want you to know before I ask it that you're under no obligation to answer." She paused. "The morning you were late last week, the 47 minutes. What happened?" A long silence. She waited. "My daughter had a nightmare," he said finally. His voice was even, not defensive, not apologetic, just factual. "She woke up scared, and I couldn't leave her until she was okay." Victoria didn't say anything for a moment. "How old is she?" 5. "Is she... Do you do this alone?" "Yeah." One word, no elaboration, no bid for sympathy. Just the truth, delivered with the same plain, unfussy dignity he'd brought to accepting a termination letter 6 hours earlier. Victoria breathed in. "I'd like you to come back to the office," she said. "Tomorrow morning, if you're willing. There are some things I should have asked before I made the decision I made today, and I'd like to have that conversation." Another silence. "You don't have to," she said. "I understand if you don't want to." "What time?" he asked. She blinked. 9 o'clock. "I'll be there," he said. And then he said something she didn't expect. "Thank you for calling," he said. Not sarcastic, not loaded, just genuine. She hung up and sat with that for a moment. Outside, the city was going dark, the amber light thinning and the first city lights beginning to come on, floor by floor, block by block, the whole downtown shifting from gold to blue. Victoria reached for her coffee. It had gone cold an hour ago. She drank it anyway. Tomorrow she was going to fix what she'd broken. She wasn't sure how yet, but she was going to start by listening. And for Victoria Bennett, who had built an entire career on talking, on analysis, on the precision of her own conclusions, starting with listening was perhaps the hardest thing she'd done in a very long time. She sat in her empty office as the city came on around her, and she thought about a girl in a yellow jacket with a stuck zipper and a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Buttons. And she thought about how easy it was to look directly at a number and miss the person standing behind it. She thought about that for a long time. Logan didn't sleep well. This was not unusual. He hadn't slept well in roughly 2 years, not since the night Sarah left, and he'd lain awake in a suddenly too large bed, listening to Emma breathe through the baby monitor and trying to figure out what the next morning was going to look like, and the morning after that, and the one after that. Sleep had become something he negotiated with rather than surrendered to, a series of brief truces between 3 and 6 a.m. when his body finally overruled his brain and went under for a few hours. But Tuesday night was worse than usual. He put Emma to bed at 8:15, which involved 2 stories, a glass of water, a debate about whether Mr. Buttons needed his own blanket, and a prolonged discussion about whether dinosaurs could have been friends with dogs if they had lived at the same time. Logan gave his honest opinion that some of the smaller dinosaurs probably would have gotten along fine with dogs, but the larger ones would have been a problem. And Emma accepted this with the gravity it deserved, and finally fell asleep with Mr. Buttons tucked under her arm and the nightlight making small yellow shapes on the ceiling. Logan went to the kitchen. He made himself a sandwich he didn't really want and ate it standing at the counter, looking at the wall. The apartment was quiet in that particular way it got after Emma fell asleep. Not peaceful exactly, more like the volume of the world had been turned down to a level where he could hear his own thoughts clearly, which was not always a welcome development. He thought about the call. I'd like you to come back to the office. He'd turned it over in his head a dozen times since hanging up, trying to locate what Victoria Bennett actually wanted from this conversation. A part of him, the part that had spent the afternoon doing the financial math and finding the results unpleasant, wanted it to mean what it sounded like it meant, that she'd reconsidered, that there was a path back. But he was careful with that part. He'd learned to be careful with hope that arrived unexpectedly, because hope that arrived unexpectedly usually wanted something from you in return. He rinsed his plate, dried it, put it away. He checked that the front door was locked, checked Emma's door, stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the quiet. Then he went to bed and lay there and stared at the ceiling and told himself to sleep and didn't, and finally drifted somewhere around 1 in the morning and woke at 5:50 with the gray October light coming through the curtains and Emma still, mercifully, asleep. He got up and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and thought about what he was going to say. He didn't come up with much. He decided to answer whatever she asked honestly and not perform anything. Not gratitude, not resentment, not the careful neutrality he'd put on in her office yesterday like a suit of armor. He was tired of armor. He'd wear it when he needed it, and today he was going to try to just be a person in a room talking to another person. He wrote a note for Emma, which he did every morning even though she couldn't quite read it yet, on the basis that she'd be able to read eventually, and it was a habit worth keeping. Bug. Went to a meeting. Ms. Patterson will drop you off, Dad. He taped it to the refrigerator at eye level and then called his neighbor Linda, who was 63 and retired and had an arrangement with Logan where she took Emma to Sunshine Valley on mornings when things got complicated. Linda picked up on the second ring, said of course she'd be over at 7:30. No trouble at all. How are you doing? Linda asked, because Linda had a specific radar for when things were not okay, and Logan suspected she'd heard him up and moving around at 2 in the morning through their shared wall. I'm all right, he said. Logan. I'm managing, he said, which was more accurate, and Linda seemed to accept it. He showered, dressed in the gray jacket and dark slacks he normally wore for client presentations, reconsidered, changed into something slightly less formal because he didn't want to walk into that office looking like he was auditioning for his own job. Settled on dark jeans and a navy button-down. Looked in the mirror for a moment, decided this was close enough to a man who had his life together, and went to make Emma's breakfast. She appeared at 7:10, trailing Mr. Buttons, her hair a complete event. You're dressed fancy, she said, eyeing him. I have a meeting. Is it an important meeting? Might be. She considered this with great seriousness. You should wear the blue one, she said. Blue is the smartest color. I am wearing the blue one. She looked again. Oh. Good. She climbed into her chair and reached for the box of cereal. Can I have the ones with the stars? The stars are all sugar. Stars are important. 2 scoops of stars and then the regular kind. She negotiated him up to 3 scoops of stars before he left the kitchen to find his keys. Linda arrived at 7:28. Emma launched herself at Linda's legs with the full confidence of someone who has never once been dropped, and Logan crouched down for the goodbye hug, got the full weight, face and shoulder version, and held on for a second. Be good, he said. I'm always good, Emma said, in the tone of someone who believes this completely, despite substantial evidence to the contrary. He drove to the office in traffic that moved, for once, the way traffic was supposed to move. He arrived at 8:54. He sat in the car for 6 minutes, hands on the wheel, not because he was scared exactly, but because he wanted to walk in with something settled in him rather than still moving. He thought about Emma saying blue is the smartest color. He thought about the way she'd held his face in her hands at the daycare gate yesterday, small palms against his jaw, making him look at her so she could tell him, he remembered now, that she loved his face. Not him. His face specifically. As if it were a separate thing deserving of its own acknowledgement. I love your face, Daddy. He breathed in, breathed out, got out of the car. The lobby receptionist, Donna, who had shaken his hand yesterday with real sorrow in her expression, looked up when he came through the door and then looked uncertain, not sure what category he fell into this morning, visitor or employee or something in between. Ms. Bennett is expecting me, he said. Logan Hayes. Of course. Donna picked up the phone. I'll let her know you're here." He stood in the lobby where, less than 24 hours ago, he had walked out with a grocery bag and 4 years of something packed into a few small objects. The lobby looked the same, the marble floor, the framed architectural renderings of Hartwell's completed developments on the walls, the low table with the real estate trade magazines nobody ever actually read. Same as yesterday. The world was consistent about that. It just kept being itself while you tried to figure out what you were. "You can go up," Donna said. He took the elevator. He knocked on Victoria's open door at 9:02. She was at her desk this time, not at the window. She looked like she'd been in the office for a while. There was a second coffee cup near her elbow and a legal pad with handwritten notes visible at the corner of her desk. She stood when he came in, which surprised him. He hadn't expected her to stand. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Thank you for the call," he said. She gestured toward the chair across from her. He sat. She sat. For a moment, neither of them said anything, and it was the kind of silence that wasn't empty. It was full of the things both of them had been thinking since 5:30 yesterday afternoon, and both of them were aware of it. "I want to be up front with you about something," Victoria said. She had her hands flat on the desk in front of her, a posture he'd noticed before. It was how she talked when she was being deliberate, when she wanted you to know she was choosing her words carefully. "Yesterday, I saw you on Maple Street, with your daughter." He looked at her. "I was driving through the neighborhood. I wasn't following you." A pause. "I need you to know that part." "Okay," he said. "And I could see the two of you together. I don't know her name." "Emma," he said. Something shifted in Victoria's face. Barely, just a small thing, but it was there. "Emma," she repeated. "How old?" 5. She nodded slowly. "I have a daughter too, Sophie. She's 8. She said this not as a bid for common ground, he sensed, but just as a fact she wanted in the room. I went home yesterday afternoon to get a permission slip I'd forgotten to send with her to school." Logan was quiet, waiting. "And it occurred to me," Victoria said, "while I was driving back, that I went home in the middle of the workday to get a permission slip, and it didn't factor into anyone's attendance record because I'm the CEO and I control my own schedule." She said this directly, without softening it. "You don't have that option. You have a fixed schedule and a 5-year-old, and from what I can tell, nobody helping you." "I manage," he said. "I know you do." Her voice was even. "I looked at your full file yesterday. All of it. 4 years of it." She picked up the legal pad, glanced at it, put it back down. "Logan, I spent 2 hours reading project assessments and contractor notes and performance reviews, and I've been in this industry long enough to know the difference between someone doing a job and someone doing the job well. You've been doing it very well." He didn't say anything. He wasn't sure what the right response to that was, coming from her today. "The Kensington project," she said. "The resource gap. You've been managing that situation on your own without flagging it to me." "It wasn't at a critical stage yet," he said. "It would have been." "I know. I was handling it before it got there." She looked at him steadily. "That's exactly my point." He shifted slightly in the chair. "I'm not sure what you're asking me, Ms. Bennett." "Victoria," she said. It was automatic, like a reflex. She looked briefly surprised at herself. "Please? Victoria?" A breath. "I'm asking you to tell me about the 3 mornings. All 3 of them. I should have asked before I made the decision I made, and I didn't, and I want to hear them now." He studied her face for a moment, looking for the angle in it, the thing she wanted that was underneath the thing she was saying. He didn't find one, which didn't mean it wasn't there, but which was at least a start. He told her. He told her about the first morning, August, the fever. Emma had woken at 5 with a temperature of 102.4, and he'd spent 2 hours managing it before it came down enough that he felt okay leaving her at the daycare with instructions to Miss Patterson and his number saved 3 places. He hadn't called ahead to the office because he'd thought he'd make it on time, and then he hadn't. He told her about the second morning, early September, the storm. A transformer had blown 3 blocks away, taking out a traffic signal at one of the major intersections near Sunshine Valley, which had turned a 20-minute drop-off into an hour-long gridlock. He'd sent an email from his phone at 8:57 saying he'd be late, which he acknowledged was not the same as pre-approved accommodation. He told her about the third morning. He told it plainly, the way he'd told it on the phone. Emma's nightmare, the specific kind that had been recurring for 8 months, the one where she was falling. How she'd appeared at his bedside at 6:47 holding Mr. Buttons. How he'd held her until she stopped being scared, which had taken longer than usual that morning, 30-something minutes, because she'd been in a fragile place that week for reasons he was still trying to understand, and it hadn't felt safe to rush her. He said all of this without apology. He said it as fact. When he finished, the office was quiet. Victoria had been watching him the whole time, and he'd watched her back, because he wanted to see what happened in her face when he talked about Emma, whether it shifted in a way that told him this was a performance of compassion rather than the actual thing. It wasn't a performance, he was fairly sure of that. There was something in her expression that looked like a person working something out in real time, not deciding how to react, but actually reacting, which were different processes and produced different faces. "You never mentioned any of this," she said. "Not to Dana, not to HR, not to me." "No." "Why not?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because I didn't think it was relevant," he said. "I know how that sounds, but I've worked in offices long enough to know how it goes when someone starts explaining their personal life in relation to their professional performance. You become a category. You become the single dad. People start calculating what you can handle, what they should give you, whether you're reliable. I didn't want that. I wanted to be evaluated on my work." "You were evaluated on your attendance," she said. "Yes," he said. "I was." No bitterness in it, just the fact of it. Victoria picked up the legal pad and set it down again, a gesture that seemed less deliberate than the others, more like something her hands did when she was thinking. "Can I tell you what I didn't see?" she said, "when I was reviewing your file yesterday." He nodded. "I didn't see a single instance of a missed deadline. Not one. I didn't see a single client complaint. I didn't see a single contractor relationship that went sideways because of your management of it. I saw a commendation from the city planning office with your name on it. I saw 3 separate notes from contractors who specifically mentioned you as the reason a project stayed on track." She paused. "And I saw a resource gap on the Kensington development that you've been quietly filling with your own problem solving for 6 weeks, which I only found out about because one contractor mentioned it offhandedly in an email." Logan said nothing. "The policy exists for a reason," she said, and her voice shifted slightly on that, not defensive but careful, like someone handling something that has edges. "But I applied it to attendance data without ever asking what was behind the attendance data. That's a failure of judgment on my part, and I want to be honest about that." Something settled in the room then. Not resolution, not yet, but something earlier. The specific quality of air in a conversation where both people have agreed to stop managing it and start actually having it. "What happens now?" Logan asked. "That depends on you," she said. "I'm withdrawing the termination, formally. Today. You have a job here if you want it." She held his gaze. "But I also want to talk about something else. And you can say no to this part entirely. It's a separate conversation. So, the termination first. Is that something you want?" He didn't answer immediately, and she didn't fill the silence, which he noticed because most people filled silences. He thought about the bench on Jefferson Street yesterday, the dying mums, the math he'd done in his head, the 6 weeks, 8 weeks of savings, the plane ticket to Phoenix, Emma's grandmother. He thought about the Kensington project sitting on someone else's desk, being handed to someone who didn't know the subcontractor's schedule had been restructured or why. He thought about Emma saying blue is the smartest color. "Yes," he said, "it's something I want." "Good." Victoria exhaled, quietly, but he caught it. Something released in her that had been held. "Good. I'll have HR process the withdrawal today. Your benefits remain uninterrupted, your salary continues as of this morning, and your access will be restored before you leave the building." She paused. "I owe you an apology, Logan." "You don't have to." "I do, actually." Her voice was firm, but not hard. "Not because the policy was wrong. but because I had a real person in front of me and I only looked at the number. I've been thinking about that since yesterday afternoon, and I don't like what I found when I thought about it. She said it without drama, just the way she said most things, directly, with the particular courage of someone who has decided that honesty is worth the discomfort of it. I'm sorry. He looked at her for a long moment. I accept that, he said. She nodded, the legal pad again. He was starting to think it was a nervous habit, one she probably didn't know she had. The other thing, she said, the part you can say no to. Okay. I want to talk about the Kensington development and about what I think you should be doing in this company. She leaned forward slightly. I've been carrying a problem for about 4 months. Kensington is one of our most important projects, 140 residential units, phase 2 of a development that the board has a lot riding on. My current project director on that development is competent, but he's managing 3 projects simultaneously, and Kensington is getting the thinnest slice of his attention. I've known this. I've been watching the timeline for signs of stress. She paused. And then I read your file yesterday, and I realized I've had someone in this building for 4 years who understands that project at a level that my project director doesn't. And I almost walked him out the door yesterday morning over 23 minutes on 3 days in 6 weeks. Logan was very still. I'm not offering you this out of guilt, Victoria said, and she said it with enough force that he understood she'd anticipated the objection and wanted it handled before it had a chance to sit wrong. I want to be clear about that. I'm offering it because your file makes the case for it, and because I think you can do it, and because I need someone who can actually fix what's broken on that project before it becomes a crisis that ends up in the boardroom. She looked at him steadily. But it's a real conversation with real expectations, and it's not something I'm just handing you to make up for yesterday. Are you willing to have that conversation? He sat with it for a moment. What's the title? He said. Development Project Director, Kensington, and then we'd talk about scope from there. What's the salary range? She told him. It was not what he'd expected. It was significantly more than what he'd expected, enough that he worked to keep the reaction off his face, and was only partially successful because Victoria saw it and said, "That's a real number. It reflects what the role actually requires." "I'd need accommodation for my schedule," he said. "Not charity. Not a special exception that expires when someone notices. I need it formal and on record. A modified start time of 9:30 on days when I have specific childcare situations, with advance notice when possible. And I need to be evaluated on my deliverables, not my seat time." Victoria didn't hesitate. "That's a reasonable request," she said. "We can formalize that as a documented accommodation. I'm also going to revise our attendance policy more broadly, because this situation made it clear to me that we have a policy written for one kind of employee's life, and we have a lot of employees living different kinds of lives. That's a systemic problem, not just a Logan Hayes problem." He looked at her. "You're going to change the policy," he said. Not skeptical, just verifying. "I'm already drafting it," she said, and she turned the legal pad so he could see it. The top half was notes, points about the conversation, things she'd written in preparation, and the bottom half was the beginning of something that looked like a policy framework. She'd been working on it before he arrived. He looked at the legal pad, then at her. "Why does this matter to you?" he asked. Not aggressively, genuinely. She was quiet for a moment, and this silence was different from the others. Less composed, more internal. "I have a daughter," she said finally. "She's 8, Sophie." She stopped. "Her father and I have been separated for 2 years. It's managed. We have a schedule, and it works, and I have resources that you don't have. But I know what it's like to be in a meeting and have your brain split in half. Half on the presentation in front of you, and half wondering whether the school nurse is going to call." She paused. "I've never thought about what that would look like from the other side of the desk. From my side, the CEO side." She looked at the window. I didn't like the answer. The room was quiet. Logan leaned back in the chair. It was the first time he'd leaned back, he realized. He'd been sitting forward the whole time without noticing it, the way you do when you're not sure you're going to stay. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Sure." "The other 2 employees who've come into this office and gotten that letter, in the last year, Was there anything in their files worth looking at? Victoria's expression changed in a way that was small but significant. He watched her sit with that. That's a fair question, she said. I'm not asking to score a point, he said. I'm asking because if you're revising the policy, that's where you'd want to start, with whether the cases you've already closed deserve a second look. She was quiet long enough that it became an answer in itself. Yes, she said. They probably do. He nodded. Then that's where I'd start. She looked at him with something new in her expression, something that hadn't been there when he walked in. Not surprise exactly, but a recalibration, the look of someone adjusting an estimate upward. You know, she said, most people in your position today would have spent this meeting being careful, saying the right things, not overreaching. I'm not overreaching, he said. You said you wanted someone who could run a development project. That's the kind of thing a development project director thinks about. He met her eyes. If you're going to give me the job, you should know what you're getting. For the first time in the conversation, Victoria Bennett smiled. It was small, a little wry, not the kind of smile that was performing anything, just a real one, the kind that surprised the person having it. Fair enough, she said. She extended her hand across the desk. He shook it. Welcome back, Logan. Thank you, he said. And then, because he was who he was, I'll have a status report on Kensington on your desk by Friday. I know you will, she said. He stood, picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He was almost to the door when she said his name. He turned. The dreams, she said, that Emma has. She said it carefully, like she wasn't sure she had the right to ask, but was asking anyway. Are they getting better? He looked at her for a moment. The question landed differently than he expected, softer. Some weeks, he said. It goes in waves. She nodded. And she looked, not sorry exactly, but like someone sitting with the weight of something they've newly understood and are not in a hurry to put down. He left the office and walked back out into the open floor. Dana Frost looked up from her desk. Their eyes met. She raised her eyebrows. A question. He gave a small nod. Her face changed in a way that looked a lot like relief, and she gave him a nod back. The compact, professional, two people who understand each other kind that didn't need anything added to it. He sat down at his desk. His computer access had already been restored. Victoria must have called IT before he came up. His inbox was there, the contractor email still open from yesterday morning, the calendar reminder for the project review still sitting in his queue as if yesterday had not happened. As if all of it had been a strange parenthetical in a day that was otherwise going to proceed normally. He took a breath. He opened the Kensington project folder. He had a status report to write. He had a daughter to pick up at 5:15, and she was going to want the round crackers, not the square ones. And she was going to want to tell him something important about something that had happened at daycare today, something that would seem small from the outside but would not be small to her. And he was going to listen to all of it. But first, the work. He always started with the work. He pulled up the project timeline, found the place where he'd left off yesterday morning before the world changed direction, and he picked up exactly where he'd stopped, with the same focused, unhurried attention he brought to every problem he decided deserved his best. Because the work mattered. It always had. It still did. Even on the days when everything else was falling apart at the seams, the work was the thing that held. And Logan Hayes, who had spent 2 years becoming a man who could hold a lot of things at once, understood that better than most. He began to type. The status report took him until 6:47 that evening. Not because it was a complicated document. Logan had written dozens of project status reports and could produce a clean one in under 2 hours on a bad day. It took that long because he was starting from the position of someone who had spent 6 weeks quietly managing a situation without leaving a proper paper trail. And now he needed to build that trail backward, documenting decisions that had already been made and rationales that had already been applied in the field before anyone with authority over the project had signed off on them. This was the uncomfortable part. He'd handled the Kensington resource gap the way he handled most problems, by solving it and moving forward, without stopping to generate the administrative record that technically should have accompanied every significant decision. It had seemed like the efficient choice at the time. Now, sitting at his desk at 6:43 with a cold cup of coffee and the floor mostly empty around him, it felt more like a gap he needed to close before someone else found it. He wrote the report honestly. He documented what he'd done, why he'd done it, and what the project's current actual status was, as opposed to what the official timeline showed. He wrote it the way he wrote everything, without embellishment, without strategic framing, just the facts arranged in the order that would give whoever read it the clearest possible picture. He sent it to Victoria at 6:49. Her response came at 7:12. He was in his car by then, fighting the tail end of evening traffic, his phone buzzing in the cup holder. He checked it at the next red light. Read it. We'll talk tomorrow. Good work. 3 sentences. He put the phone face down and drove the rest of the way home. Emma had already eaten. Linda had stayed and made pasta, Emma's specific request. The kind with the small shells because she believed, firmly and without room for argument, that pasta was more delicious when shaped like things. Emma was in the bathtub when Logan got home, conducting a complex naval operation involving 4 rubber ducks and a bar of soap that had been repurposed as a submarine. She narrated the entire operation in a running commentary that required no audience participation, though Logan sat on the closed toilet lid and provided it anyway. And then the big duck says, "You cannot come to this ocean," Emma announced. "Why not?" "Because he's in charge of the ocean, and he didn't invite the small ducks." That seems like a power problem. Emma considered this. What's a power problem? When someone's in charge of something and they use it in a way that's not fair. A pause. The rubber duck navy bobbed in the bathwater. "Like a boss," Emma said. Logan looked at her. "What do you know about bosses?" "Ms. Patterson is the boss of the daycare," Emma said, with the authority of someone citing established fact. "And she says that being the boss means you have to be extra careful because everyone is watching what you do." She made the big duck push the small ducks away. "The big duck is not being extra careful." "No," Logan agreed. "He is not." He thought about Victoria saying "I'm sorry" across a desk. He thought about the legal pad, already full of policy notes, already building towards something different. He thought about whether that counted as extra careful or whether it was just correction. He wasn't sure yet. He was going to wait and see how the correction held. He got Emma dried and into pajamas and had the conversation about Mr. Buttons' blanket, which remained a nightly negotiation, and read her 2 chapters of a book about a bear who wanted to be a detective, which Emma found extremely plausible as a career path for a bear. He turned off the main light, left the nightlight making its small yellow shapes on the ceiling, and sat in the chair beside her bed for a few minutes after she fell asleep the way he sometimes did, not doing anything, just being there. He thought about the title, Development Project Director, the salary she'd mentioned. He'd run the numbers in the shower before dinner, and the difference between what he'd been making and what she'd offered was not a small thing. It was the difference between 6 weeks of savings and 6 months. It was the plane ticket to Phoenix and several more after it. It was Emma's winter coat, which was getting too small, and a daycare payment that he'd been moving around on the credit card for 3 months. It was not nothing, but it came with weight. It came with a project that was partially broken and a board that had money riding on it and a CEO who had just publicly reversed a termination decision, which meant that if Logan Hayes underperformed in this role, it would not be a quiet failure. It would be a visible one, attached to a decision Victoria had made and defended. He understood that. He was not going in naive. He sat there in the dark beside his sleeping daughter, listening to her breathe, and made the decision he'd essentially already made the moment he sat back in the chair in Victoria's office and stopped leaning forward. He was going to do the job. He was going to do it right. And it was not going to be the kind of right that was careful and safe and stayed inside the lines. It was going to be the kind that got things built. He turned off the nightlight. Emma slept better in full dark, he'd learned, despite what she believed about this, and went to bed. For the first time in 2 days, he slept through till morning. The next 2 weeks moved fast. There was the formal reinstatement paperwork, which HR processed with the efficiency of people who have been told something is a priority and taken that instruction seriously. There was a meeting with the outgoing Kensington project director, a man named Carl Briggs, 51, methodical, genuinely decent, who handed over the project files with the expression of someone setting down a bag he'd been carrying too long. She'll be tough, Carl said, meaning the project, not Victoria. But the bones are good if you get ahead of the contractor situation. I know, Logan said. I've been watching it. Carl gave him a look that was part surprise and part respect. How long? 6 weeks. Then you know about the permitting delay on the secondary units. I have a call with the city office Thursday. Carl leaned back in his chair. Okay, he said. Yeah, you've got this. There was also the meeting with the 2 senior project managers on the Kensington team. Reeves, who was 29 and good at the technical side but defensive about feedback, and Miriam, who was 44, quiet, and had more institutional knowledge than anyone at Hartwell, except possibly Arthur, from accounting. Logan had worked adjacent to both of them for years. Being their direct supervisor now was a different geometry, and he was careful about it. He called them in separately. He didn't do a team meeting first, didn't come in with a restructuring announcement or a new process rollout. He just talked to each of them, listened more than he talked, asked Reeves what the biggest obstacle on the project was, from where he sat, and let Reeves talk for 20 minutes without interrupting. Asked Miriam what she would do differently if she were running it, and Miriam, who had been waiting for someone to ask her that question for approximately 4 months, told him with great precision and 0 wasted words. He took notes. Real ones. In the half-full notebook from his desk drawer that he had left behind when he packed his grocery bag. Dana had saved it for him, left it on his desk his first morning back without saying anything. He was 3 days into the new role when the call came from the board. Not to him directly, to Victoria. But he heard about it from Dana, who heard it from the board liaison, which was the path that most significant information took through the Hartwell building, a kind of informal telegraph that nobody acknowledged but everyone used. Apparently someone on the board had questions about the reinstatement, about the optics of reversing a termination, about what kind of message it sent regarding policy consistency. Logan heard about this on a Thursday morning. He was in the middle of a site call, and he filed the information away without reacting to it, because reacting to things he couldn't control was a waste of energy he didn't have. He finished the site call, wrote up his notes, and moved to the next item on his list. Victoria dealt with the board herself. He learned later, from Dana, through the telegraph, that the conversation had been direct, which apparently was the word people used when they meant Victoria had said what she thought, and not adjusted it for the room. She had told the board that the termination had been a mistake based on incomplete information, that reversing it was the correct decision and not a precedent for future policy exceptions, and that the revised attendance framework she was implementing would prevent the same situation from recurring. She had then briefly described Logan's project history, the Kensington situation specifically, and the board had asked no further questions. Logan thought about that later, about what it cost her to say I made a mistake to a room full of people who were already watching her closely, already running their quiet calculations about whether she was up to the job. He thought about it and found it was harder to be uncomplicated about Victoria Bennett than it had been 2 weeks ago. She was not an easy person. She was precise and sometimes blunt, and she moved at a speed that occasionally left people behind, and she had an instinct toward control that was probably always going to bump up against someone. She had fired him over attendance data without asking a single human question, and that was a real thing that had really happened, and it had cost him something that couldn't be entirely refunded. But she had also made the call. She had also said, "I'm sorry," and meant it. She had also stood in front of a board and said I was wrong without softening it into something more palatable. There were not that many people in Logan's experience who could do that last part. He was still thinking about all of this when Victoria appeared in the doorway of the small conference room he'd been using as a base for the Kensington Review. "You have a minute?" she asked. "Sure." He closed the laptop. She came in and sat down across from him, which she did sometimes now, so it came to him rather than summoning him. And he'd noticed it without commenting on it, unsure what to make of a pattern that was still forming. "I want to run something by you," she said, "and I want your honest take, not the polished version." "Okay." The policy revision. She put a printed draft on the table between them. HR had input, legal had input, this is what came out. She pushed it toward him. "Tell me what's wrong with it." He picked it up, read it. It took about 4 minutes. She waited. The revised policy was better than the original. It included language about documented accommodation requests, about performance-based evaluation criteria, about a review process before any attendance-related termination. It was professionally drafted, legally careful, and would have been sufficient to prevent exactly the situation that had happened with Logan. He put it down. "It's a good policy," he said, but it still puts the burden entirely on the employee to request accommodation." He tapped the relevant section. "This assumes people know how to ask and feel safe asking. Some won't. The people who most need the flexibility are often the same people who are least likely to raise their hand for it, because they're afraid of being categorized." Victoria looked at the paper. "How do you fix that?" "You build it into the onboarding process, not as an optional disclosure, but as a standard conversation. Everyone has this conversation with HR when they start. Everyone knows the options exist. Nobody has to ask because the asking is already built into the structure." He paused. "It doesn't have to be invasive. It's just, here's the framework. Here's what accommodation looks like. Here's how you access it. Normalize the conversation before anyone needs it." She looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up a pen and made a note in the margin. "Anything else?" she said. "One thing, the performance metric criteria. Right now this is still vague. Evaluated on deliverables and results. You need to define what that means per role, or it becomes a thing managers can interpret however they want. An inconsistent interpretation is how policies like this get undermined 6 months after they're implemented." She made another note. "You've thought about this a lot," she said. "I've had a lot of time to think about what the policy missed," he said. It came out more direct than he intended. Not harsh, but unguarded. She looked up from the paper, held his gaze. "Fair," she said, and she meant it. That was the conversation. It lasted maybe 15 minutes. She took the draft, made her notes, thanked him, and left. He sat there for a moment afterward, aware that this was an unusual way for a CEO and a newly promoted director to interact, aware that most professional relationships at this level had more formal architecture around them. This one didn't have that, and he wasn't sure yet whether that was a good thing or just a thing that hadn't become complicated yet. He opened the laptop and went back to the contractor schedule. The week Emma got sick was the first real test. It happened on a Monday in late October, 3 weeks after Logan's return. He was at his desk by 8:15, which had become his routine on the days Linda was available. Emma to daycare by 8, Logan downtown by 8:15. The extra 45 minutes before the building fully woke up, a quiet window he used for the kind of thinking that required sustained concentration. He was working through a structural issue on the Kensington secondary unit permits when his phone buzzed with a number he recognized as Sunshine Valley's main line. Ms. Patterson. Emma had a fever of 101.8. She was asking for Daddy with some urgency. He was in his car 12 minutes later. He sent 2 emails from his phone in the elevator on the way down. One to Miriam, flagging the contractor call at 10 and asking if she could run point. One to Victoria's assistant, not Victoria directly, noting that he was handling a childcare situation and would be working remotely and could be reached on his phone and by email, and would have the permit analysis done by end of business regardless. He picked Emma up from Sunshine Valley. She was sitting in the small rest area near the front desk, wearing the expression of someone who has been valiantly sick and wants it acknowledged. She had a small bucket on her lap and was holding Mr. Buttons with the specific grip of a person who needs something to hold. "Hey, Bug," he said, crouching down to her level. "My stomach hurts," she said, "and my head." "I know. Let's go home." "Will you stay?" "Yeah, I'll stay." Her expression shifted from valiantly sick to merely sick, which meant the performance element had left because she didn't need it anymore. He picked her up, bucket and rabbit and all, nodded to Ms. Patterson, and carried her to the car. He worked from the couch while Emma slept in his bed. He had the laptop open, his phone on the cushion beside him. The baby monitor he'd never actually gotten rid of sitting on the coffee table carrying the sound of Emma's breathing from the bedroom. He ran the 10 o'clock call from the couch, muted on his end while Miriam handled the contractor, unmuting twice to add context that Miriam didn't have. He wrote the permit analysis. He answered 6 emails. He reviewed Reeves's site assessment notes and sent back 3 specific questions. Emma woke up at noon wanting soup. He made soup, the specific kind she liked, which was the chicken noodle from a can, heated slowly, not too hot, the broth she could drink from the side of the bowl. He brought it to her in bed on the wooden tray he'd bought at a thrift store for exactly this purpose, with a glass of water and 2 crackers, the round ones, which he had started keeping in the pantry without fail. "Daddy," she said, around the soup. "Yeah." "Do you have to work?" "I'm working from home today." She considered this. "Is that allowed?" "Yes." "Did you ask?" He almost smiled. "I let them know." "Okay," she said, apparently satisfied with the procedural correctness of this. She ate half the soup, drank most of the water, and fell back asleep with the spoon still in her hand. He took the spoon, tucked Mr. Buttons under her arm, and went back to the couch. By 4 o'clock, her fever had broken. By 5, she was sitting up in bed asking for the crackers and wanting to know why the detective bear in her book hadn't solved the mystery yet. Had he even tried? Because she had ideas and she was ready to share them. Logan sat on the end of the bed and listened to the ideas. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Victoria called. Not texted. Called. "How is she?" she asked. He was standing at the kitchen sink, a glass of water in his hand. He'd been slightly surprised by the call, so not unwelcome, but unexpected. "Better," he said. "Fever broke around 4. "Good." A pause. "Miriam said the contractor call went well." "She's solid," Logan said. "She's been solid the whole time. She just needed someone to actually ask her opinion." "I'll remember that," Victoria said. It was the way she said things she intended to act on. Flat, declarative, filed. "The permit analysis is in your inbox," he said. "I saw it. It was thorough." Another pause, this one slightly different. "Logan, you didn't have to send all that today. No one was expecting—" "I know," he said, "but I wanted it done." She was quiet for a moment. "How do you do that?" she said. "Do what?" "Work at that level and also be there. For her. At the same time." He thought about it. "I don't know that I do it well," he said honestly. "I think I do each thing okay, and I try not to let either of them down too badly on any given day. That's more or less the whole system." "That's not as small a thing as you're making it sound," she said. He didn't answer that. He wasn't sure how to answer it without either dismissing it or leaning into it in a way that felt wrong. "How's Sophie?" he asked instead. A brief pause. Surprised by the question, he could tell. "She's good. She's going through a phase where she wants to learn everything about marine biology. There are books everywhere. I found one under the couch cushion this morning." Emma went through a dinosaur phase. "Sophie is very serious about the marine biology. She has opinions about the classification of certain fish that I am not qualified to evaluate." "Emma had opinions about whether dinosaurs could have been friends with dogs," he said. "I told her some of the smaller ones probably would have been okay." Victoria laughed. It was short and genuine and caught her off guard. He could tell because she made a small sound after it that was almost embarrassment, like she hadn't expected it to happen. "That's a very specific diplomatic answer." "She respects specificity." "Sophie too," she said. "I have no idea where that comes from." He smiled at the window over the sink, at his reflection and the dark city behind it. "They figure out what they need," he said, "and then they need it, relentlessly." "Yes," Victoria said, "that's exactly it." The call ended a few minutes later. He stood at the sink for a while after, trying to locate what had shifted in the last 20 minutes. Something had, some small tectonic thing, the way ground shifts not with drama, but with the slow, inevitable movement of things that have been under pressure for a long time and finally found a new alignment. He wasn't entirely sure what to do with that, so he rinsed his glass, put it away, and went to bed. The Kensington site meeting 3 days later was the one that mattered. Not officially. Officially, it was a standard Phase 2 progress review with the lead contractor, a man named Dennis Park, who had been building residential developments in Marcellus for 22 years and had the specific weather-beaten authority of someone who had seen every way a project could go wrong and had most of the scar tissue to show for it. Logan had met Dennis twice, briefly, in his previous role, He'd managed the relationship from a distance, the same way he'd managed most things in the old role, with competence and awareness but without authority. Now he was sitting across from Dennis at a folding table in a construction trailer on the Kensington site, with the noise of active construction outside and a set of revised project plans between them. And the geometry was different. Dennis was not unfriendly. He was also not going to extend courtesy beyond what had been earned. "You want to walk me through this?" Dennis said, gesturing at the plans. "I want you to walk me through it," Logan said. "I've read everything in the file. I want to hear it from you." Dennis gave him the look that older, experienced men in physical industries sometimes gave younger managers who were trying the right approach, testing whether it was real or performance. "All right," Dennis said. "Pull up a chair." They were in the trailer for 2 hours and 40 minutes. What came out was not what the project files said. What came out was the actual state of the Kensington development, which was, and Dennis said this without ceremony, the way people state things they've known for a while and are relieved to say out loud, materially behind, in ways that the official timeline obscured because the official timeline had been built to manage the board's comfort rather than reflect the construction reality. The secondary unit foundations had a drainage issue that hadn't been formally flagged. The electrical subcontractor was running 3 weeks behind because of a supply chain problem that nobody upstream had been told about. And the original Phase 2 budget had a gap of somewhere between $80,000 and $110,000, depending on which materials costs you used. A gap that Carl Briggs had apparently known about for 6 weeks and had been, Dennis put it with charitable understatement, managing through narrative. Logan sat with this. He asked questions. He did not panic. He did not deflect. And he did not, this mattered to Dennis, Logan could tell, pretend to know things he didn't know. "How long to address the drainage issue if we start Monday?" Logan asked. 3 weeks if the weather holds." "The electrical subcontractor. Is it a capacity problem or a relationship problem?" Dennis raised an eyebrow. "Meaning? Meaning, is this a supplier issue we wait out? Or is this a contractor who's overcommitted and we need to have a different conversation?" Dennis was quiet for a moment. "Different conversation," he said, not elaborating further, which was itself the elaboration. Logan nodded. "Okay, I'll take that one." "You sure?" A trace of skepticism. Polite, but there. "He's the one holding up the schedule, not the supplier. I'd rather have that conversation directly than work around it for another 6 weeks." Dennis looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded once, slowly, the way he nodded when he'd made up his mind about something. "All right," he said. "Then we can probably work with this." Logan drove back to the office with the trailer visit replaying in his head, not anxiously, but constructively, pulling it apart and reassembling it into a plan. The drainage issue was addressable. The electrical situation was fixable if the conversation went well. The budget gap was the most serious problem and the hardest one because a $100,000 gap didn't get solved quietly. It went to Victoria, it possibly went to the board, and it had been hidden by his predecessor in a way that was going to require careful navigation. He pulled into the Hartwell parking structure, sat in the car, and called Victoria. She picked up on the second ring. "How is the site?" "I need 30 minutes with you today," he said. "There are things in the Kensington file that aren't in the Kensington file." A pause. He could hear her shifting, the background noise of her office clarifying. "Define things." "A budget gap, between 80 and 110,000, and a drainage issue that's been known about for at least 3 weeks and not flagged." Silence. "Who knew about the budget gap?" she said. Her voice had gone flat the way it went when she was doing the thing Logan had learned to recognize, running the implications, sorting them rapidly by severity. "Carl knew," he said, "for at least 6 weeks." Another silence. This one longer. "How confident are you in Dennis Park's numbers?" "High," Logan said. He had no reason to exaggerate. He was relieved someone was asking. "Okay." Her voice came back fully, making the decision he could almost hear being made. 4 o'clock. Bring everything." He went upstairs. He spent 2 hours building the clearest, most honest picture of the Kensington situation he could construct from Dennis's account and the files, including the things that were going to be uncomfortable to show. He didn't soften the budget number. He didn't bury the part about Carl's management of the situation. He built a document that said exactly what was wrong and then presented 3 paths forward with honest assessments of what each one cost in time, money, and exposure. He walked into Victoria's office at 4 o'clock with a printed copy and his laptop. She read the document while he sat across from her. She read it the way she read everything, fast, complete, nothing skimmed. When she finished, she set it down and was quiet for a moment. "Carl," she said. "He was managing a hard situation with bad tools," Logan said. "I'm not saying it was the right call, but I understand how you get there." "I don't," she said. "Victoria." He said her name the way she'd asked him to, and it still felt slightly new, like clothing he was breaking in. If Carl had flagged this 6 weeks ago, what would have happened? She opened her mouth, then closed it. "He was afraid of the conversation," Logan said. "The same way my employees are afraid to ask for accommodation. It's the same problem. People are making decisions based on fear of how their leader will respond, instead of trusting that the response will be functional." He paused. "This is what your culture produces. Not bad people, afraid people." The silence that followed was not comfortable. It was also not the kind of silence that came before a refusal. It was the kind that came before someone decided to sit inside something difficult instead of stepping back from it. "That's a direct thing to say to your CEO 3 weeks into a new role," she said. "You asked for my honest take," he said. "Not the polished version, those were your words." She looked at him for a long moment. "They were," she said. "The drainage issue we can fix. The electrical contractor I'll handle. The budget gap needs to go to the board, but we can frame it around the solution, not the problem, if we move fast." He tapped the document. "Path 2. That's the one." She looked at the document. Path 2 involved a 12-week extension and a formal budget amendment that would require board approval, but it was the option that delivered a completed, structurally sound development rather than a rushed one that would generate maintenance costs for years. "Path 2 is the expensive conversation," she said. "Path 2 is the honest one," he said. Another silence. Then Victoria Bennett picked up her pen and circled Path 2. "Set it up," she said. "Board presentation, 2 weeks." "I'll have a draft to you in 5 days," he said. He stood, picked up his things. "Logan," she said it before he reached the door. He turned. She was looking at the document, not at him, but there was something in her posture that was less composed than usual, something that had been opened by the last half hour and hadn't fully closed yet. "The afraid people problem," she said. Is that something that's fixable?" He thought about it genuinely. "Yeah," he said, "but you have to be the one to fix it, and it's slower than fixing a budget gap." She nodded, slowly, like someone accepting a timeline that was longer than they wanted. "Okay," she said. He left. Outside, the October evening was coming in cold and fast, the sky going dark by 5:30 now. The trees along Jefferson Street stripped down to their bones. He walked to his car, turned the heat on, and sat for a moment in the warmth of it. He had a daughter to pick up. He had a board presentation to start drafting in his head. He had a structural drainage problem and an electrical contractor conversation and a $100,000 gap to close. He also had a job that, 3 weeks ago, he had not had. He had a title that sat differently than he'd expected. Not lighter, not heavier, just different, the way new things always felt before you wore them into shape. He pulled out of the parking structure and into the evening traffic. He'd call Linda to confirm pickup. He'd stop and get the round crackers, because he was out. He'd think about the board presentation at the red lights, which was not a healthy habit, and he did it anyway. He'd pick up Emma, and she'd have something important to tell him. She always had something important to tell him, and he would listen to all of it. Because that was the deal he'd made with himself 2 years ago, in a suddenly too large bed, in the first hours of a new kind of life he hadn't chosen. You do the work, and you do the rest of it. And you do not let either thing swallow the other. So far, it was holding. The board presentation took 9 days instead of 5. Logan had told Victoria 5 days and believed it when he said it, but the Kensington budget documentation turned out to be more complicated than a single gap. The deeper he went into the project financials, with Miriam's help, because Miriam had been quietly tracking discrepancies for months, and had a folder on her desktop labeled Kensington Actuals that she produced without drama the morning Logan asked. The more it became clear that Carl Briggs hadn't been managing one problem. He'd been managing four, each one patched over with optimistic projections and timeline language that sounded precise but committed to nothing. The drainage issue was real. The electrical subcontractor gap was real. The budget shortfall, when Miriam's actual numbers were laid against the official projection, came out at $117,000, not $80 to $110. And there was a fourth thing, a materials substitution on the Phase 1 foundations that had been approved by Carl 9 months ago as a cost-saving measure, and that Dennis Park, when Logan called him, described in the specific, careful language of a man who has strong opinions he doesn't want attributed. "I'll say this," Dennis said. "If you're building something meant to last 40 years, you want the original spec. How much to fix it?" A pause. "Depends on how much has already been poured." "Give me a range." Dennis gave him a range. It was not a pleasant range. Logan sat with that number for about 30 seconds, staring at the wall of the small conference room that had become his working home base. Then he added it to Miriam's spreadsheet, updated the board presentation document, and sent a message to Victoria's assistant asking for 30 minutes. Victoria came to him this time, which she'd been doing more consistently over the past 3 weeks, appearing in the doorway of the conference room rather than having him summoned upstairs. He wasn't sure if this was a deliberate signal or just the efficiency of moving between meetings, and he'd stopped trying to analyze it. She looked at the updated number on his laptop screen. "How confident?" she said. "High on the budget gap. The materials issue is a range. Dennis's estimate, not a formal engineering assessment. We'd need an independent structural review before we present hard numbers on that one." She straightened, turned away from the screen, walked to the window. The conference room had a view of the parking structure and a sliver of the street below, not the downtown panorama from her office, but she stood at it anyway the way people stand at windows when they're thinking. "How long for an independent review?" she said. 2 weeks if I call today." "Call today?" She turned back. "And I want everything, all 4 issues. Don't shape it. Just put it in front of them straight." "The board won't love that." "No," she agreed. "But I'm done with narratives that manage their comfort. That's what got us here." She said it without bitterness, just as a fact she'd arrived at and was holding steady. "Straight." "Straight," he said. She was almost out the door when she stopped. "Logan, the materials issue. If the structural review comes back confirming Dennis's range, how does that change the Phase 2 timeline?" He'd already done this math. 6 to 8 weeks on top of the 12 we're already adding, best case. She absorbed this. A small muscle in her jaw moved. "Okay," she said. "It's better to know now than after 60 families are living in it," he said. "I know," she said. "I know that." And she left. He called the structural engineering firm that afternoon. He called the electrical contractor the next morning, which was the conversation he'd been preparing for since Dennis had described it as a relationship problem rather than a supply chain problem. The contractor's name was Ray Hollis, and he ran a mid-size electrical firm that had been doing work for Hartwell off and on for 6 years. Logan had never dealt with him directly. He knew enough about the situation from the project files to understand that Ray was a capable contractor who had, at some point in the last 6 months, quietly taken on more work than he could properly staff, spread his crews too thin, and had been managing the Kensington schedule with the same optimistic projection language that Carl had been applying to the budget, telling everyone what they wanted to hear while the actual progress fell quietly behind. He called Ray at 8:15 before Ray had time to start the day in full defensive posture. "Ray, this is Logan Hayes. I'm the new project director on Kensington." A brief pause. "Yeah, I heard there was a change." "I want to talk about the schedule," Logan said. "Not the official one, the actual one. I've been on site with Dennis. I know where things are, and I'm not calling to have a problem conversation. I'm calling because I need to know what you actually need to get back on track, and I'd rather hear it from you directly than figure it out around you." A longer pause. "What did Dennis tell you?" Ray said, careful. "That it was a conversation we needed to have." Ray was quiet for a moment. Then something in his voice shifted, the guardedness going down a half measure, not gone, but reduced. I'm 3 crews short, he said. Have been since August. I took on the Mercer Street project because I thought I had the capacity, and I didn't. And by the time I knew it, I was already committed. Kensington's been getting the short end. What do you need? I need either to bring in a subcontractor to cover the gap, which costs money, or I need a revised schedule that gives my crews time to catch up without everything going sideways. Scope of the subcontractor cost? Ray gave him a number. It was not small. It also, Logan noted, landed inside the range he'd already allocated for contingency in the updated budget, which meant it was survivable. If I bring this to Hartwell as an authorized cost, Logan said, can you commit to a firm completion date on the electrical phase? Another pause. Yeah, Ray said. It came out sounding like a man making a commitment he intended to keep, not one he was performing. Yeah, I can. I'll have something in writing to you by Friday, Logan said. And Ray, next time you're in this position, call me before it's 6 weeks in. Not because I'll make it easier, but because we can usually solve it before it gets expensive. A beat. Fair enough, Ray said. Logan put the phone down, wrote up the call summary, added the subcontractor cost to the board presentation budget, and moved to the next item. Miriam appeared in the doorway at 11 with 2 coffees, which had become a quiet routine neither of them had named. She set one on the table in front of him and sat down with hers. Ray Hollis? She said. Handled. She nodded. Carl tried to handle Ray twice, she said. Both times it turned into a standoff. How'd Carl approach it? Officially. Formal written notice, deadline language. She sipped her coffee. Ray closed up. Carl interpreted that as Ray being difficult. It just made things worse. Ray's not difficult, Logan said. He was embarrassed. Miriam looked at him over the rim of her cup. You got that from a 20-minute phone call? I got it from his files, Logan said. 6 years with Hartwell, never a schedule problem, always comes in at or under budget. Then one bad quarter. People don't change character that fast. They have bad quarters. Miriam was quiet for a moment. You know, she said, I've been at this company for 11 years and nobody has ever looked at it that way. That's a different problem, Logan said. She smiled slightly. Yes, she said. I suppose it is. The board presentation was scheduled for the 3rd Thursday of November. Victoria had arranged it for the morning session before the board settled into the afternoon agenda items they were comfortable with. She wanted them alert and without the option of postponing to another cycle. This was a deliberate choice, and Logan appreciated the deliberateness of it. He spent the weekend before running the presentation, not practicing. He didn't practice presentations the way some people did, in front of mirrors or with recorded run-throughs. He ran the substance. He sat at his kitchen table on Saturday morning with Emma watching cartoons in the living room and the presentation open on his laptop, and he argued against himself for 2 hours. He looked for every place the board could push back, every number they could question, every assumption he was making that wasn't fully documented, and he built responses for each of them, not defensive responses, but honest ones. Emma wandered in at one point and stood beside his chair looking at the screen. What are you doing? She said. Getting ready for something hard, he said. She considered this. Is it a test? Sort of. Do you know the answers? I know my answers, he said. I just have to see if they accept them. She nodded with the gravity of someone familiar with high-stakes evaluations. I had a test last week, she said. How'd you do? I got the colors right, but I spelled my name wrong. You spelled your name wrong? I put the M in the wrong place, she said. She didn't seem particularly devastated by this, more empirical about it. I know where the M goes now. That's the main thing, he said. She patted his arm and went back to the cartoons. He smiled at the screen, then went back to the presentation. The structural engineering firm came back the following Monday with their preliminary findings, which confirmed Dennis's concern about the foundation materials without reaching his worst-case number. The issue was real and needed addressing, but the remediation costs landed at $68,000 rather than the top of Dennis's range, which meant the total budget revision was significant but not catastrophic. Logan added the confirmed number to the presentation, removed the estimate range, and sent the updated document to Victoria. Her response came 20 minutes later. Good. See you Thursday. He got to the Hartwell offices at 7:30 on Thursday morning, 2.5 hours before the presentation, He used the time to go over the site with Dennis one more time by phone, confirming that nothing had changed in the last week that he didn't know about. Nothing had. He drank 2 cups of coffee and ate a granola bar he found in his desk drawer that turned out to be stale, but ate it anyway. He reviewed the presentation one final time, not changing anything, just reading it through cleanly. At 9:55, he took the elevator to the 4th floor conference room where Hartwell's board meetings were held. There were 7 board members. Logan had met 3 of them briefly over the past 2 years, faces at quarterly presentations, hands shaken in lobbies. The other 4 he knew only from their names on documents and the way people in the office spoke about them, which was with the specific calibrated caution that organizations develop around people who hold the money. Victoria was already in the room when he arrived, standing at the head of the table talking to a board member named Gerald Fitch, who was 64, had been on the Hartwell board for 9 years, and had the permanent expression of a man waiting to be disappointed. Logan set up his laptop, connected to the display, arranged the printed copies of the summary document he'd prepared, and waited. Victoria opened the meeting at 10:02. "I asked Logan Hayes to present the Kensington situation directly," she said, "because he's the person who found it, and he understands it better than anyone in this room right now, including me." She said it cleanly, without preamble, and sat down. Logan stood up. He'd given presentations before, dozens of them, to clients, to contractors, to city planning offices. He'd given them in rooms where people wanted him to succeed, and in rooms where people were looking for reasons to push back. He knew the difference between an audience that was skeptical and an audience that was hostile, and he knew that the difference usually didn't matter as much as people thought, because both of them responded to the same thing: information delivered honestly, without performance. He delivered the Kensington situation in 22 minutes. 4 problems. The current actual status of each. The cost of each. The timeline impact of each. And then 3 paths forward, with his recommendation clearly labeled as his recommendation and the reasoning for it laid out so that anyone who disagreed could tell him specifically where his reasoning failed. He did not soften the budget number. He did not bury the foundation issue. He did not manage the room. He gave it what it needed to make a decision. When he finished, Gerald Fitch was the first to speak. "Why didn't we know about this 6 weeks ago?" he said. Not to Logan, to Victoria. "Because the information wasn't reaching me," Victoria said. She was perfectly still at her end of the table. "That's a problem I'm addressing structurally, and I'll present the framework at next month's meeting. Right now the question is Kensington." Fitch looked at Logan. "Your path 2. Walk me through the board approval process for the budget amendment." Logan walked him through it. Fitch pushed back on 2 numbers: the remediation cost and the electrical subcontractor estimate. Logan had documentation for both, and shared it. Fitch reviewed it without speaking for approximately 90 seconds, which was a long time to have 7 people watching you read. "The subcontractor cost," Fitch said. "This is coming out of contingency reserve?" "Yes." "It doesn't require new capital, just a reallocation." "And the remediation?" "That's the amendment, $68,000 against the Phase 2 budget." "Which is already approved at what figure?" Logan gave him the approved figure. Fitch looked at the differential. "That's not nothing," Fitch said. "No," Logan said, "it's not. But it's $68,000 now, or significantly more in structural maintenance costs over the life of the development, plus the liability exposure from a foundation that doesn't meet the original spec." He held Fitch's gaze. "I can give you the long-term cost projection if it would help the decision." Fitch looked at him for a moment. "You have that with you?" "I have everything." A board member named Sandra Osei, who was 57 and had said nothing so far, leaned forward. "Mr. Hayes, how long have you been in this role?" 7 weeks, he said. She looked at Victoria briefly, then back at Logan. "And you identified 4 separate issues in 7 weeks that the previous director managed around for 6 months." "I had help," Logan said. "Miriam Caldwell on my team had been tracking the actuals. She had the data. I just looked at it." Sandra Osei wrote something on her notepad. The board discussion ran for another 40 minutes. It was not comfortable, and Logan didn't try to make it comfortable. He answered what was asked, acknowledged what he didn't know, and held the recommendation steady without rigidity when the conversation moved around it. At the end, Fitch called for a vote on the budget amendment. The Path 2 recommendation passed, 5-2. The two dissenting votes wanted Path 1, which was cheaper and faster, and would have produced exactly the kind of development that cost you more in years 3 through 10 than you saved in year 1. Logan noted the dissents without arguing them, because the vote had gone the way the evidence supported, and that was what a vote was for. Victoria closed the meeting. People dispersed. Logan was packing up his laptop when Sandra Osei stopped beside him. "Good presentation," she said. "Thank you. I mean the substance, not the delivery." She said it like someone making a distinction that mattered to her. "You gave us information we could actually use. That's rarer than it should be." "I appreciate that," he said. She left. Logan finished packing up, nodded to Victoria across the now empty room, and went downstairs. In the hallway outside the elevator, he ran into Gerald Fitch. Fitch was putting on his coat, unhurried, the way men of his generation put on coats in hallways, buttoning each button with full attention. He looked up when Logan approached. "Hayes," he said. "Mr. Fitch." Fitch looked at him for a moment with the eyes of someone who has spent 40 years deciding what people were made of and has gotten reasonably good at it. "The previous director," he said. "Carl Briggs, 12 years with this company." "Yes," Logan said. "You didn't throw him under the bus in there." "It wasn't useful," Logan said. "It would have been easy," Fitch said. Logan thought about how to say the next thing accurately. Carl was in a situation where telling the truth felt more dangerous than managing it, he said. "That's a culture problem, not a character problem. I'm trying to be part of fixing the culture problem. Publicly blaming Carl doesn't move that forward." Fitch buttoned the last button, looked at Logan with something that had shifted from assessment to something else, something closer to acknowledgement. "Keep doing what you're doing," he said, and he walked away down the corridor. Logan took the elevator down. The afternoon was ordinary after that. Site calls, a contractor follow-up, a lengthy email chain about the Phase 2 material sourcing that required 3 careful replies. The ordinary machinery of the job, running again after the disruption of the morning, settling into the rhythm that was starting to feel less new and more like his. He left at 5:20, which was later than he'd wanted, and called Linda from the parking structure to tell her he was on his way. Emma was with Linda, had been since 3:30, and by all reports had spent the last 2 hours engaged in a craft project involving significant quantities of glitter about which Logan had been warned. He got to Linda's apartment, knocked, and the door opened to reveal Emma covered in a specific and irreversible amount of gold glitter, holding a construction paper object that appeared to be either a star or a very angular fish. "It's a star," Emma announced, holding it up. "For your desk." "It's great," Logan said. And he meant it, fully, in the way you mean things when a 5-year-old makes you something with their own hands. "It has your name on it," Emma said, turning it over to show him the back, where Dady had been written in green crayon, the D slightly large, the Y trailing off the edge. Logan looked at it for a moment. "Perfect," he said. He took it, thanked Linda, and got Emma's coat on with the glitter redistribution this involved, and they walked to the car in the cold November evening, Emma holding his hand and telling him about the craft project in considerable detail, and then pivoting without transition to a question about whether fish had feelings. "Some scientists think so," Logan said. "What do you think?" Emma said. "I think if I were a fish, I'd have feelings," he said. "What kind?" "The kind that wanted the water to be the right temperature," he said. Emma considered this very seriously. "I would want it warm," she said. "Not bath warm. Like swimming pool warm." "That's reasonable." She talked about fish feelings for the rest of the drive home, and Logan listened, and the star rode on the console between them, gold glitter slowly distributing itself across every available surface. He was almost home when his phone buzzed. He waited until they were parked, Emma already out of the car and heading for the building door to check it. A text from Victoria. "Board approved. Good work today, genuinely." He looked at it for a moment. "Thank you," he typed back. Then, after a second, "Your call brought it home." Walking in and telling them straight took the room somewhere it needed to go. A pause. Then, "We both did." He put the phone in his pocket and went inside. The next several weeks had their own shape. the steady, not always clean forward movement of a project that had been redirected and was finding its new line. Dennis's crew addressed the drainage issue on schedule, which meant the weather held the way Dennis said it needed to, which was not something you counted on in November, but which happened anyway. Ray Hollis's subcontractor came in, and the electrical work resumed at a pace that finally matched the project schedule rather than apologizing for the distance behind it. Reeves, who had been defensive and slightly territorial in the early weeks, had a conversation with Logan in the third week of November that changed the shape of their working relationship. Logan had asked him about his career goals, directly, not in the context of a performance review, just in the middle of a working lunch over sandwiches in the conference room. Reeves had been surprised enough by the question that he answered honestly, which was that he wanted to run his own development projects eventually, but felt like he'd been stuck in a support role so long he didn't know if he was capable of more. Logan said, "You're running the Phase 1 contractor coordination on Kensington starting next week. Full authority, full responsibility. If you hit a wall, come to me. If you don't hit a wall, tell me what you learned." Reeves looked at him across the sandwich table. "That's a significant handoff." "You're ready for it," Logan said. "You've been ready for it. Someone just needed to say so." Reeves did not respond to this immediately, which Logan had learned was how Reeves handled being surprised, with stillness followed by competence. He came back the next morning with a coordination plan that was, without question, the best thing Logan had seen him produce. Logan read it, made 2 small notes, and approved it. Miriam, who had watched this from her desk, said nothing about it directly. She simply sent Logan a message at the end of the day that said, "Good call on Reeves, nothing more." The policy revision went to the full company the second week of December. Victoria sent it herself in an all-hands email she'd written and rewritten over several weeks. Logan had read 3 drafts at her request, not editing them, but responding to them, telling her which sections landed and which ones felt like legal language wearing a human costume. The final version was direct and plain and said, without significant padding, that Hartwell had not had adequate systems for supporting employees navigating personal circumstances, that this had resulted in decisions the company regretted, and that the new framework was designed to fix this by building accommodation and flexibility into the standard employment structure rather than treating it as an exception. It did not mention Logan by name. He had asked her not to. "Why not?" she'd said. "Because it makes it about me, and it's not about me," he said. "It's about the next person, the one who hasn't come forward yet because they're afraid of what happens when they do." She had looked at him for a moment and then deleted the line. The email went out on a Tuesday at 9 in the morning. By noon, Logan had received 4 messages from colleagues, people he hadn't spoken to in weeks, people he barely knew, that were variations on the same thing. A note of quiet acknowledgement, a thank you that didn't specify what it was for but communicated it clearly. 2 people mentioned situations of their own, in passing, that the old policy would have mishandled. He answered each of them briefly, acknowledged the note, didn't make it larger than it was, but he kept them. All 4, in a folder in his email. December moved fast the way Decembers do, filled at the edges with the preparations that pile up whether you're ready for them or not. Emma's daycare holiday show, for which she had been assigned the role of what she described as a snow person who is also a scientist, which required a white costume with a lab coat over it and had been assembled by Logan and Linda over 2 evenings with craft felt and safety pins. Emma wore it with the seriousness of a person inhabiting a character, and when she walked onto the small daycare stage and delivered her one line, "Snow can tell us a lot about the weather," she delivered it with a conviction that drew more applause than it might otherwise have received. Logan sat in the 3rd row with his phone turned face down, fully present, and clapped harder than was strictly necessary. It was at the holiday show that he first saw Victoria outside the architecture of the office. She appeared just before the performance started, slightly out of breath, maneuvering past folding chairs in the way of a person who has come from somewhere else in a hurry. She was wearing a coat he hadn't seen before, a dark green one, and she had a small girl with her. Sophie, clearly Sophie, 8 years old, with her mother's sharp dark eyes and the unhurried way she moved through a room that was also somehow her mother's. They took seats 2 rows back and to the left of Logan. Victoria looked across the rows, found Logan, and gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Not surprising, Sunshine Valley serviced the whole neighborhood. He nodded back. After the performance, which involved 7 children in various states of costume commitment, 2 of whom decided to improvise and 1 of whom sat down in the middle of the stage and refused to continue for reasons that remained unexplained. There was the small social chaos of parents reclaiming children, children refusing to be reclaimed, and volunteers circulating with juice boxes and cookies. Emma found Logan in 3 seconds flat and launched herself at him with full momentum. "Did you see me?" she demanded, face in his shoulder. "I saw you," he said. "You were the best snow scientist." "I didn't mess up my line." "You did not mess up your line." "I practiced it 27 times," she said, with the precision of someone who had genuinely counted. She became aware, as she pulled back, of another child nearby, Sophie, who was standing next to Victoria and looking at Emma's lab coat with the expression of someone encountering something that required further investigation. "Is that a lab coat?" Sophie said. Emma looked down at herself. "Yes," she said. "I'm a snow scientist." "What does a snow scientist do?" Sophie asked, not skeptical, genuinely interested. Emma's face lit up in a way that indicated Sophie had asked exactly the right question. "They study snow," she said, "and they figure out things about weather and also about ice and sometimes about glaciers. Glaciers are really big." "I know about glaciers," Sophie said. "They're melting." "Yes," Emma said with the gravity of the informed. "That's a problem." Victoria, standing slightly behind Sophie, caught Logan's eye. Her expression was not quite amused, but something adjacent to it, something warm that wasn't fully committed yet to showing itself. "Small world," she said. "Same neighborhood," he said. "Ms. Patterson's been Emma's caregiver since—" She stopped. "Sorry, 2 years?" 2 years, he confirmed. Sophie was now asking Emma about the specific science of snowflakes, and Emma, who had absorbed a moderate amount of information about snowflakes from a library book 3 months ago and had been waiting for an opportunity to deploy it, was explaining with confidence and some degree of accuracy. "She's good with kids she just met," Victoria said, watching them. "She's good with most things she just met," Logan said. "Strangers, animals, situations. She approaches things like they're probably fine until they prove otherwise." "Sophie's the opposite," Victoria said. "She studies first." A pause. "She studied me for a full month before she decided I was trustworthy." Logan looked at her. "How old was she?" 4. He laughed. Short, genuine. "Emma would have had you figured out in 10 minutes and then moved on to something else." Victoria smiled at that. The real one. The small one that surprised her when it arrived. "Sophie," she said, "has you all figured out too?" She nodded at Emma. "She's already decided your daughter is interesting." "How can you tell?" he asked. "She's asking questions," Victoria said. "She only asks questions when she's actually interested. Otherwise, she just waits politely for the conversation to end." They stood there for a moment while their daughters discussed the crystalline structure of ice in the approximate but enthusiastic terms available to a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old. "How's the board response been?" Logan asked. "Since Thursday." "Pitch called me Friday morning," Victoria said. "Good call or bad call?" "He said Path 2 was the right call and that he wanted the project director on the quarterly report presentation in February." She paused. "That's Fitch's version of a gold star." "I'll take it," Logan said. "I thought you would." She was quiet a moment. "He also said something else, about the way you talked about Carl in the meeting, about not using it to make yourself look better by contrast." Logan was quiet. "He respects that," Victoria said, "for whatever it's worth." "It's worth something," Logan said. A pause between them. Not uncomfortable. The kind that had become more familiar over the past 2 months. 2 people who had begun in an adversarial geometry and were still finding the new shape of things. The shape that wasn't quite friendship and wasn't purely professional. That had no clean name but existed anyway and seemed to be working. "Emma," Logan said, leaning down slightly, "we need to get your coat." Emma turned from Sophie, then back to Sophie. "Can we talk at the park sometime?" she said, with the directness of a person who makes social plans without consulting anyone. Sophie looked at her mother. Victoria looked at Logan. "Yeah," Logan said. "We can make that work." Emma accepted this with the satisfaction of someone who had handled a business negotiation efficiently. She took Logan's hand, waved at Sophie with her free hand, and they walked toward the coat rack together. Logan got Emma's coat on, the winter one, the new one, dark red, one size up from the one she'd outgrown, and helped her with the zipper, which worked perfectly, which was still sometimes a small surprise. The things that worked when you expected them to be difficult. Emma looked up at him. "Daddy?" she said. "Is that lady your boss?" "Yes," he said. "She seems nice," Emma said, "but also a little serious." "She's working on the serious part," Logan said. Emma considered this. "I think Sophie is working on it too," she said. "She's getting better, though. She smiled at me at the end." They walked out into the December cold together, Emma's hand in his. The parking lot lit up with the string lights someone had hung along the daycare fence for the holiday season, amber and warm against the dark. Logan lifted Emma into her car seat. She still let him do this. Some mornings she insisted on climbing in herself, fierce about the independence of it, and some mornings she raised her arms and let him lift her, and he'd learned not to predict which it was going to be. Tonight she raised her arms, and he picked her up and settled her into the seat and buckled the harness with the practiced speed of someone who has done it 10,000 times. "Dad," she said when he was about to close the door. He stopped. "Yeah." "The dream," she said. "I didn't have it last night." He looked at her. She was matter-of-fact about this, the way she was matter-of-fact about most things she observed, not making it large, just reporting it accurately. "You didn't?" he said. "No," she said. "I dreamed about fish, the kind with feelings." "Was it a good dream?" She thought about it. "Yes," she said. "The water was swimming pool warm." He closed the door, walked around to the driver's side, got in, started the engine, let the heater run. He sat there for a moment before putting it in reverse, the amber string lights making small reflections in the windshield, the city going about its December business around him. He thought about a grocery bag and a termination letter, and a lobby where Donna had looked at him with real sorrow and not known what category he fell into. He thought about a bench beside dying mums and the specific weight of math that didn't add up. He thought about a phone call he almost hadn't answered from a number he didn't know. He thought about how things turned, not cleanly, not without cost, not in the swept-up, everything-resolved way of stories that didn't know what they were doing, but they turned. They turned because someone made a call, because someone else answered it, because a woman read a file and actually looked at what was in it, and a man decided to walk into an office one more time instead of not. He thought about all of that for about 10 seconds. Then Emma said, "Can we have the soup?" from the back seat. "Yeah," he said, "we can have the soup." He put the car in reverse and pulled out into the evening, headed home. January arrived the way it always did in Marcellus, without ceremony, dropping the temperature 15 degrees overnight and leaving the city looking scraped clean, the streets gray and sharp-edged, the trees along Jefferson Street bare enough that you could see clear through them to the buildings on the other side. Logan had always had a complicated relationship with January. It was the month that stripped things down to what they actually were, took away all the warmth and color and holiday distraction, and left you standing in the cold with whatever you'd built. What he had built, he was finding, was holding. The Kensington drainage remediation finished in the first week of January, 3 days ahead of Dennis's revised schedule, which Dennis communicated to Logan via a text message containing 4 words and a period. Foundation solid, moving forward. Logan forwarded it to Victoria with no additional comment, and she responded the same way. Sometimes the best communication was the kind that didn't need anything added to it. Ray Hollis's subcontractor crew had the electrical phase 60% complete by mid-January, working through the cold with the focused momentum of people who have something to prove. Ray himself appeared on site twice that Logan knew of, not because he was required to, but because he was the kind of contractor whose reputation was tied to his work in a way that meant he couldn't entirely delegate the watching of it. Logan ran into him on the second visit, standing at the edge of the secondary unit block with a coffee and a critical squint. "Looking good," Logan said. "Looking adequate," Ray said. "Good is when it's done." "Fair," Logan said. Ray glanced at him sideways. You submitted that subcontractor cost as a formal authorization. Put it through the right channels. Didn't make me look like I was the problem. You weren't the problem, Logan said. The situation was the problem. Ray was quiet for a moment, looking at the construction. Carl would have made it about me, he said. Not bitterly, just as fact. Carl was managing a different set of pressures, Logan said. Ray looked at him. You always do that, he said. Somebody does something that makes your life harder, and you explain why they did it instead of just being annoyed about it. Logan considered this. Being annoyed doesn't get the electrical done. Ray made a sound that was almost a laugh. No, he said. It doesn't. He finished his coffee and crushed the cup. We'll be complete on the electrical phase by February 3rd. I'll put that in writing today. I'll hold you to it, Logan said. I know, Ray said. That's why I'm saying it. He walked back toward the work crew, and Logan stood in the cold for a moment, watching the site. The organized motion of it, the specific productivity of a construction project that has found its rhythm, the way things that had been stalled and sideways for months were now simply moving forward, one task at a time. He thought about the grocery bag, the bench with the dying mums. He thought about how easy it would have been for this project to have remained broken. If he hadn't come back, if Victoria hadn't called, if Miriam hadn't kept her folder of actuals, if Dennis hadn't been the kind of man who told the truth when someone finally asked for it. So many individual decisions, each one small in isolation, and here was what they added up to. A construction site in January with its foundation solid and its electrical moving forward, and 140 families who would eventually live in units built to the original spec. He didn't think this grandly. He thought it practically, the way he thought about most things. But he thought it. He drove back to the office. The February board presentation was the one Gerald Fitch had requested, and Logan prepared for it with the same approach he'd brought to November. No shaping, no narrative management, just the clearest picture available of where the project stood and where it was going. The difference this time was that the picture was substantially better. The budget amendment was on track. The timeline showed a 12-week extension that was, according to Dennis's latest projections, achievable without further revision. The materials issue was resolved. The electrical phase was complete, Ray Hollis having delivered on his written commitment to the day. Fitch sat at the head of the table and listened to the presentation the way he'd listened to the first one, with the full, slightly intimidating attention of someone who has spent 4 decades deciding when to trust people's numbers. When Logan finished, Fitch said, "The secondary unit drainage work, Dennis Park signed off?" "In writing," Logan said, "along with the independent structural engineer we brought in. And the Phase 2 timeline. February 3rd was the electrical completion date. You're telling me that held?" "To the day?" Logan said. Fitch nodded slowly. He looked around the table briefly, some private consultation with his own judgment, and then looked back at Logan. "The Mercer Street development," he said. "Do you know it?" Logan knew it. Everyone at Hartwell knew Mercer Street. It was the company's largest planned project, a 220-unit mixed residential development on the east side of the city that had been in planning stages for 18 months and was approaching the point where it needed a director. "I know of it," Logan said carefully. "What do you know?" "That it's been in pre-development for a year and a half, that the site acquisition was completed in November, that the Planning Commission gave preliminary approval in December." He paused. "And that nobody's been named director yet." Fitch looked at Victoria, who had been sitting at her end of the table with the particular stillness she maintained in board meetings, present, attentive, giving nothing away prematurely. "I want to talk about Mercer Street at the April meeting," Fitch said. "With a director identified, not interim, named." He looked back at Logan with the eyes that had been assessing him since November. "I want you thinking about it." Logan held his gaze. "I'm thinking about it," he said. Sandra Osei, across the table, made a note. The meeting ended at 11:40. People filtered out. Logan was closing his laptop when Victoria came around the table and stood beside him, not at her customary distance, but closer, the way people stand when they want what they're saying to not be for the whole room. "Mercer Street," she said quietly. "That wasn't me. That was Fitch." "I know," Logan said. I want to make sure you know it's a real conversation, not a courtesy. She looked at him directly. The scope is bigger than Kensington. The board exposure is bigger. The team is larger. I know what Mercer Street is, he said. Do you want it? He considered the question the way he considered most questions. Not quickly, not as performance, but actually. He thought about what it would require. He thought about Emma, who was 5 and would be 6 in March, and had recently announced she wanted to be a marine biologist and a snow scientist and possibly also a detective, though the detective aspiration was contingent on whether the bear in her book ever solved the case. He thought about Linda, who had become a reliable part of the structure of their days. He thought about his mother in Phoenix, who he'd finally managed to visit in December with Emma for 5 days, during which Emma had presented her grandmother with a detailed plan for how the hip surgery would go and what the recovery would look like, sourced from what appeared to be a mix of medical fact and creative interpretation. He thought about a bench beside dying mums and the math that hadn't added up. It added up now. It would add up more with Mercer Street. Yes, he said. I want it. Victoria nodded. One firm nod, the kind that closed a question. Then let's make sure April goes right, she said. She picked up her folder and left. Logan stood in the empty boardroom for a moment. Outside the 4th floor windows, January Marcellus was doing what it always did. Scraping, stripping, gray and honest in its particular way. He looked at it without romance and without dread. He had work to do. The park happened on a Saturday in late February, the kind of late February Saturday that arrives occasionally as a miscalculation by winter. Warmer than it had any right to be, the sun actually present, the Marcellus Riverside Park briefly restored to something that felt like it belonged to a different season. It had been Emma's idea, persistently maintained since the daycare holiday show. She had asked about Sophie 3 times, with the patient consistency of a person who has learned that adults sometimes need reminding about things they said they would do. Logan had texted Victoria, which had itself been a small moment of recalibration. Moving from work text to something that didn't belong to any particular category. Victoria had replied in under 2 minutes, which suggested the same thought had crossed her mind. They arrived separately, which was neither planned nor unplanned, just the way it worked out. Logan and Emma got there first, Emma immediately identifying the good climbing structure and beginning her assessment of it. Victoria and Sophie arrived 7 minutes later, Sophie wearing a blue coat and carrying a book, which Logan suspected was a hedge against situations that turned out to be less interesting than anticipated. The book turned out to be unnecessary. Within 5 minutes, Emma had conducted what could only be described as a recruitment interview, ascertaining Sophie's position on several important matters, including dinosaurs, the feelings of fish, and the comparative merits of the round cracker versus the square cracker, and had apparently found her acceptable on all counts, because she took Sophie by the hand and led her toward the climbing structure with the confidence of a person showing someone their home territory. Sophie, to her credit, went without hesitation. Logan and Victoria stood near the bench closest to the structure in the approximate posture of adults supervising children, watching without hovering, available without intruding. The park moved around them normally. Joggers, other families, a man walking a large dog, who appeared to be walking itself while the man was walked. She brought the book, Logan said. She always brings the book, Victoria said. She hasn't opened it yet. Emma has that effect. Victoria smiled. The real one, which was becoming less rare. She's relentless, she said. It came out as a compliment. She came out that way, Logan said. I can't take credit for it. Yes, you can, Victoria said. Some of it. He looked at her sideways. She was watching the girls on the climbing structure. Sophie explaining something to Emma, who was listening with the focused expression she wore when she was storing information for later use. How's she doing? Victoria asked. The dreams. Less frequent, he said. Dr. Okafor thinks she's working through it, in her own way. You found a therapist for her? A play therapist. Specializes in kids who've had disrupted home situations. He said it plainly. She's been going since October. Emma calls it the drawing place because they do a lot of drawing. She seems to like it. Victoria was quiet for a moment. I should have done that with Sophie, she said. Earlier. I waited too long because I kept telling myself she was fine. Was she fine? She seemed fine, Victoria said. That's different. He didn't say anything, and she didn't seem to need him to. She said it with the specific quality of a person making a true statement about a mistake without needing to inflate or deflate it. We started last fall, she said, after everything. She's doing better. She talks more now about things she was carrying around quietly. Sophie, Logan said. Yes. 8 years old and carrying things quietly, he said. Wonder where she gets that. Victoria looked at him sharply, and then her expression shifted because she'd registered it, the gentle version of what he'd said, the lack of edge in it, and she made that small sound that was almost embarrassment, the one that arrived when she laughed before she'd decided to. That's fair, she said. They stood in the February sun for a while, not talking, not the uncomfortable kind of not talking, the other kind. The kind that arrives when two people have said enough real things to each other that silence has stopped feeling like a gap that needs filling. Emma, from the top of the climbing structure, yelled, "Daddy, watch!" "I'm watching," he called back. She performed some maneuver that was clearly the result of 10 minutes of planning, landed slightly sideways, declared it a success, and turned to Sophie for confirmation. Sophie, with great seriousness, gave a thumbs up. "She's going to be something," Victoria said, watching. "She already is something," Logan said. "I'm just trying not to slow her down." Victoria was quiet for a beat. "That's a good way to think about it," she said. "I spend too much time trying to shape Sophie toward what I think she should be. She pushes back." A pause. "She's right to." "What does she want to be?" Logan asked. "Currently?" "A marine biologist, specifically one who studies bioluminescence." He turned to look at her. "Emma wants to be a marine biologist, too." Victoria turned toward him at the same moment, and they looked at each other across this coincidence, this small, improbable thing, and the expression on both their faces was the same. Not surprised exactly, more like the recognition of something that has been building toward a point and has just arrived at it. "Well," Victoria said. "Yeah," Logan said. On the climbing structure, Emma said something to Sophie that made Sophie laugh. Not the polite social laugh of a child being appropriate, but the real one, the surprised out-of-her laugh that her mother would have recognized from the description of how Emma had received the news about the dinosaur-dog friendship compatibility. Sophie's whole face changed when she laughed. You could see in that unguarded moment every year of restraint in her dropping away and something freer underneath. Victoria saw it. Logan saw her see it. She didn't say anything for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was slightly different. Not emotional, but honest in a way that required effort, the way some honest things do. "I almost didn't call you," she said. "That night, after I saw you on Maple Street." He waited. "I sat in my car for a long time before I drove back to the office. I kept thinking. I'd made the decision. It was clean. Moving backward made it messy. And I don't like messy." She paused. "I'm still not great with messy." "I know," he said. "But I kept seeing—" She stopped, looked at the climbing structure. "The zipper. You were fixing the zipper on her jacket and she was just waiting. She trusted you to fix it." She said it like it still meant something to her, this small, specific image. "And I thought, I've never asked this man a single human question." Logan was quiet. "That bothered me more than the decision," she said. "More than being wrong. That I'd sat across from you for 4 years, in meetings, in reviews, and never once thought to know anything about what your life actually looked like." He thought about that. About 4 years of performance reviews and project presentations and strategic discussions, all of them conducted in the clean professional register. Nobody's personal life entering the room unless it became a problem, and even then, only in the form of attendance data. "I didn't make it easy," he said. "I kept it separated on purpose." "I know," she said, "but a leader doesn't wait for people to volunteer what they need. That's—" She stopped. "That's the thing I'm still working on." He turned to look at her directly. "Victoria." She turned. "You called," he said. "That's not a small thing. A lot of people wouldn't have." She held his gaze for a moment. Something in her face was uncertain in a way he didn't often see. Not the uncertainty of someone who doesn't know what they think, but the uncertainty of someone allowing themselves to be seen, not knowing, which was different and harder. "I'm still figuring out how to be the kind of leader I want to be," she said. "I thought I had it understood, and then—" She gestured, not at anything specific. Then you saw a zipper," he said. "Then I saw a zipper," she said. They stood there for a moment with that between them. Not quite funny, not quite serious, the particular quality of something true said plainly. The April board meeting was on the 14th, a Thursday, clear and cold the way April in Marcellus sometimes fooled you into thinking it was still winter. Logan arrived at 7:15. He had been awake since 5, not from anxiety, just from the specific alertness that arrived before things that mattered. He made coffee, read through the Mercer Street proposal one final time, and decided it was what it was, and there was nothing left to adjust. Emma had been briefed in the way he briefed her about things, not with full detail, but with enough that she could understand the shape of it. He'd told her he had an important meeting and that it might mean a bigger job. "Bigger than your current job?" she'd said. "Yes." She'd thought about this. "Would you still pick me up at the same time?" "Yes," he said. "The accommodation is on record." He said it in adult terms because she was 5 and would be 6 in 2 weeks, and she deserved the adult terms, delivered simply. "Okay," she said. "Then I think you should do it." "Yeah?" he said. "Your blue is already the smartest," she said. "You just need a bigger room." He had laughed. Full, genuine, the kind that came from somewhere real. And she'd looked pleased with herself, which she deserved to. He walked into the boardroom at 9:57. The Mercer Street proposal took 31 minutes to present. Logan had built it over 6 weeks, drawing on everything he'd learned from Kensington. Not just the technical lessons, but the human ones. The proposal included not just the development plan, but a staffing framework that deliberately built in the things Kensington had taught him: clear reporting structures, a culture of early escalation, defined accommodation pathways for every role on the project team. He had written those sections himself, not delegating them because they weren't addenda. They were the foundation. Fitch listened. Sandra Osei listened. The other 5 board members listened in the varying degrees that people listen to things. When Logan finished, Fitch looked at the staffing framework section, the one that spelled out the culture piece. "This is unusual," Fitch said, "for a project proposal." "I know," Logan said. "You're making a case for the way the project is managed, not just what gets built." "Yes," Logan said, "because the way you manage it determines what gets built. Kensington showed me that in both directions." He held Fitch's gaze. The 4 issues on Kensington didn't happen because Carl was incompetent. They happened because people didn't feel safe bringing problems forward until they were crises. If we build Mercer Street with the same culture, we'll get more crises. Different ones, maybe, but more of them. Fitch was quiet. He looked at the page for a moment. "The budget is larger than Kensington," he said. "The timeline is longer. The exposure is higher." "Yes," Logan said, "and you're confident you can deliver." "I'm confident I can do the work honestly and make the best decisions available with the information I have at each point," Logan said. "That's what I can promise. That's what anyone can promise." Fitch looked at him for a long moment. "That's the right answer," he said. The vote for Logan Hayes as project director of the Mercer Street development was 7-0. He shook hands with the board members as they filed out. Fitch's handshake was firm and brief, and said more than Fitch would have put into words, which was itself a form of communication he'd come to understand over the last months. Sandra Osei said, "Don't let the scope intimidate you. The scope is just more of what you already know how to do." "Thank you," he said. "I mean it practically," she said. "Not as encouragement, as information." He appreciated the distinction. Victoria was the last to leave the room. She waited until the others had gone, which was either deliberate or the natural result of being the last to close her folder, and when they were alone, she said, 7-0. "I heard," he said. "Fitch voted first," she said. "He never votes first." Logan looked at her. "You've been on this board for 18 months. Did he ever vote first before?" "Not once," she said. They stood in the empty boardroom, the April light coming through the windows now genuinely warm. Winter finally having given up the argument it had been making since January. "We have a lot of work to do," Logan said. "We do," she agreed. "I want Miriam on the Mercer Street team," he said. "Full project manager role. She's been functioning at that level for years without the title." "Done," Victoria said. "And I want Reeves on the technical side. He's ready." "Also done." A pause. "Anything else?" "The policy revision," he said. "The onboarding piece. Have you implemented it yet?" "HR is rolling it out this month," she said. "The standardized accommodation conversation at onboarding. Every new hire." She paused. "You were right, by the way, about building it in instead of waiting for people to ask. We've had 3 existing employees request accommodations in the 2 weeks since the internal announcement. 3 people who'd been managing situations alone for over a year." He thought about that. 3 people. A year each, minimum, carrying things alone inside a system that hadn't given them a door to knock on. "What situations?" he said. "1 caregiver situation, elderly parent, 1 chronic health issue, 1 single parent." She said the last one without emphasis, which was its own kind of emphasis. "Are they being accommodated?" "Yes," she said. "HR handled it well." She paused. "Logan, I also went back and looked at the 2 terminations from last year, the ones you asked about." He'd asked about them once, in October, and then not again, trusting her to either do it or not. "And?" "One of them, a woman named Anita Reyes, left for reasons that look very different in retrospect. She said it with the specific flatness that meant she'd sat with this for a while and had already processed the discomfort. I reached out to her last month." "What happened?" "We talked for 40 minutes. Her situation was similar to yours in ways. Not identical, but similar. She'd been handling a childcare situation alone and had 3 late arrivals in 8 weeks, and I terminated her employment without asking a single question. She said it like someone pressing a bruise to make sure it still hurt, not masochistically, but as a form of honesty. She'd found other work by then. She didn't want her position back. But she wanted to know why no one had ever asked," Victoria said. "Just that. She said, and I'm paraphrasing, that she'd spent 4 months wondering if she'd imagined being good at her job. Because the way she'd been let go felt like it confirmed something she'd always feared about herself." The boardroom was very quiet. "What did you say?" Logan asked. "I told her she hadn't imagined it. I told her the failure was in how we evaluated people and not in what she was actually worth." Victoria paused. "And I told her I was sorry, without a qualifier." "How did she respond?" "She cried a little, and then she said thank you." Victoria's voice was even, but it had the quality of someone holding something carefully. "That's a conversation I should have had a year ago. I can't give her that year back." He didn't say anything because there was nothing useful to add to that. Some things you just had to hold. "The second case?" he said after a moment. "Less clear-cut," she said. "The issues were real, but the process was wrong. I flagged it for HR review." A pause. "I'm not letting myself off the hook on it." "I know you're not," he said. She looked at him. "How do you know that?" "Because you called me," he said. "That night. You didn't have to. You could have closed the file and moved on and built a narrative where the policy was the policy and that was the end of it." He held her gaze. "You called. That tells me something about what you do with discomfort." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "You know, most people in your position would have taken the reinstatement and the promotion and not pushed on any of the other things." "I'm not most people," he said. Not with arrogance, just as fact, the way he said most things. "No," she said. "You're not." The Mercer Street groundbreaking happened on a Thursday in early June. It was a small ceremony, not a press event, not the kind with ribbon cuttings and photo opportunities, just the actual beginning of the actual work. The moment when the first of the surveying and site prep gave way to the first of the real construction. Dennis Park was there, looking critically at the sky for weather signs, finding it acceptable. Ray Hollis was there, with 2 members of his crew, standing at the edge of the site perimeter drinking coffee. Miriam stood beside Logan, reviewing the Day 1 coordinator notes with the specific pleasure of someone who has been doing director-level work for years and is finally doing it with a director-level title. She had a new business card she kept producing to verify it was real, which Logan had decided he was not going to mention. Reeves was on the far side of the site, talking to the site engineer with the focused intensity of someone who has been given real responsibility and is not going to waste it. Logan watched him for a moment. The way he stood, the way he listened, the way he pushed back on something the engineer said with a specific and informed argument. 6 months ago, Reeves had been defensive and slightly lost. Now he looked like a man who knew where he stood. These things happened, Logan thought. Given the right conditions, given someone willing to look at what was actually there instead of what the category said, people surprised you. Reeves had surprised him. Miriam had surprised him, though Miriam had perhaps surprised him least because she'd been waiting to be given the chance for years and had simply been invisible in the right ways. He thought about Ray Hollis on the Kensington site in January, saying you always explain why people do things instead of just being annoyed about it. He'd thought about that more than once since then, turning it over, not sure if it was a compliment or a personality assessment or both. He thought it was probably both. He was not going to apologize for it. His phone buzzed. Emma's daycare, the daily pickup reminder he'd set for himself as a redundant safeguard. 5:30. He had 4 hours. He put the phone away and turned back to the site. Dennis appeared beside him, coffee in hand, critical squint operating at full capacity. Foundations on this one are right from day one, Dennis said. I'm not having that conversation twice. No, Logan agreed. We're not. The specs are good, better than Kensington's original, frankly. He looked sideways at Logan. Somebody pushed back on the materials sourcing. Miriam, Logan said. Dennis nodded. She knew what she was talking about. She always did, Logan said. Dennis was quiet for a moment, watching the site begin its first real day of becoming something. You know what this project's going to be, he said, when it's done. 220 units, Logan said. Mixed residential. 220 families, Dennis said. Kids growing up in those apartments. People making their lives in there. He paused. I've been building things for 22 years, and I don't forget that part. What it is, when it's done. He looked at Logan. Don't forget that part. I won't, Logan said. Victoria arrived at 10:15, which was when she'd said she'd arrive. Not for the groundbreaking ceremony specifically, but for the first site walkthrough, which was on the schedule. She came in a hard hat that sat slightly wrong, the way hard hats sit wrong on people who don't wear them regularly, and with the legal pad under her arm that was, Logan had decided, simply a permanent extension of her. She walked the site with Logan for 40 minutes. He showed her the drainage plan, the foundation specs, the electrical routing that Ray had laid out with the precision of someone determined to leave no room for the conversation they'd had on Kensington to ever need repeating. She listened, asked questions that were good questions, made notes. At the end of the walkthrough, standing at the eastern edge of the site, where in roughly 18 months a lobby would exist, she looked out at the open space and was quiet for a moment. When Kensington is finished, she said, I want to go to the ribbon cutting. It'll be in October, he said. I know. She paused. I want to be there for the part where it becomes real, where people walk in and it's a place they're going to live. She looked at him. Is that strange? No, he said. I've never been to one of our ribbon cuttings, she said. I've always been in the next meeting. He thought about what to say to that, about the cost of always being in the next meeting, about the specific things that went unseen when you moved too fast between things that needed looking at. Come to the Kensington one, he said simply. She nodded. I will. They walked back through the site toward the gate. Around them, the construction was fully underway now. The morning's careful quiet giving way to the productive noise of a project in motion, the sounds of machinery and instruction and material movement that added up to something being built from the ground. He thought about Emma, who would be 6 years old in 2 days. He thought about the birthday cake she'd requested, which was chocolate with blue frosting because blue was the smartest color and she was going to be 6, which she had informed him was a serious age, an age that required the smartest frosting. He thought about his mother in Phoenix, who he'd spoken to Sunday, who sounded better since the hip surgery, who had asked about Victoria in the careful way she asked about things she wanted more information about but wasn't going to push on. He thought about the morning, 2 years ago, when he'd stood in a too large bed watching Emma sleep through the baby monitor and tried to see the shape of the next morning and the one after that. He'd been afraid, in a way he hadn't told anyone about, that the shape was going to be permanently smaller than what he'd imagined his life would hold. That survival was going to be the thing, and everything else was going to be just making survival look okay. He had been wrong about that, not because everything had resolved easily. It hadn't. Not because the hard mornings had stopped. They hadn't. Emma still had the dream sometimes. The math still required managing. There were still mornings where he was 15 minutes behind before he'd finished his first coffee, and the whole day had to be rebuilt from a deficit. But the shape was not smaller. The shape had turned out to be something he hadn't expected, not larger in the triumphant way, not the story where losing everything becomes the dramatic prerequisite to gaining everything. More like the shape that emerges when you don't quit, when you keep making the next decision carefully and honestly, and with as much regard for the people around you as for the outcome you want, and eventually the accumulation of those decisions produces something real, something that holds. Victoria stopped at the gate and turned back to look at the site one more time. "You know what I think about sometimes?" she said. "What?" "That zipper." She said it with a small, slightly wry expression, the look of someone amused at themselves. "I drove past it, and I saw one thing, a father fixing his daughter's jacket. And it changed everything I thought I understood about a situation I'd already decided." She paused. "I've started trying to look for the zipper in other situations. The small thing that tells you what's actually happening underneath the information you already have." "Is it working?" he asked. "Sometimes," she said. "I'm not always fast enough. I'm better at numbers than I am at—" She made a gesture. "People still surprise me when they shouldn't." "They'll keep doing that," he said. "I know." She looked out at the site one more time. "I'm going to be better at letting them." He looked at her. This woman who had made a mistake and had the particular hardness and the particular courage to look directly at it and then do the uncomfortable thing, which was not just to correct it, but to ask why it had happened and to change the conditions that had made it possible. Who was still working on the afraid people problem, slowly, the way she had accepted was the pace of it. Who kept a legal pad and made notes in the margins, and who laughed when she wasn't planning to, and whose daughter wanted to study bioluminescence, and who was, still and genuinely, not good at the soft parts, but who was trying in the way that mattered, which was the real way, not the way that wanted credit for trying. She was not a perfect leader. She was not a complete person who had all the important things figured out. She had sharp edges and a speed that sometimes left people behind, and a residual instinct toward control that was going to keep bumping up against the world for a long time. But she was honest about it. That was not nothing. In Logan's experience, that was actually quite a lot. "I'll see you Thursday," he said. "Site review." "Thursday," she agreed. She left. He stood at the gate for a moment and looked at the Mercer Street site, at the machinery and the crews and the beginnings of what would eventually be a place where 220 families would build their lives. He thought about what Dennis had said. Don't forget that part. He wouldn't. He drove to Sunshine Valley at 5:25 early for once, which almost never happened, and which Ms. Patterson acknowledged with a raised eyebrow as he came through the door. Emma was in the art corner, working with great concentration on something involving orange paint and what appeared to be a significant portion of the paper roll. She hadn't seen him yet. He stood in the doorway for a moment and watched her. The focused tilt of her head, the complete absorption of a person doing something that mattered to them, the paint on her hands and the tip of her nose that she wasn't aware of. She looked up and saw him, and her whole face did the thing. "Daddy." Not excited loud, just genuine, the way she said it in the dark at 6:47 in the morning when she'd had the dream and needed him there. Just Daddy. The whole word, the whole meaning of it. "Hey, Bug," he said. She got up and came to him with paint-covered hands, and he picked her up anyway, both arms, paint and all, and she put her face against his shoulder the same way she always had, since she was small enough to hold in one arm. And he stood in the doorway of Sunshine Valley on a June evening with his daughter in his arms and the orange paint on his jacket and the city going about its ordinary life around them. "How was your day?" she said, muffled against his shoulder. Good, he said. Really good. Did you build something? He thought about the site, the foundations, the 220 families who didn't know yet that they were coming. Started to, he said. It'll take a while. That's okay, Emma said. The good things take a while. He held her a little tighter for a second, not demonstratively, just because she was there and she was his, and 2 years of hard mornings had produced this evening in this doorway, and he knew better than to move through it too fast. Yeah, he said, they do. They walked to the car together, Emma still in his arms, Miss Patterson waving from the door, the June evening warm and long the way June evenings were, the light still hours from leaving. He buckled her in. She held the painting she'd finished, orange and something else layered, and looked at it critically. It's a sun, she said, but also it could be a house. I couldn't decide. He looked at it. It's both, he said. The best things are both. She looked at the painting again. Apparently satisfied with this interpretation, she set it carefully on the seat beside her. Can we have the soup? She said. We can have the soup, he said. He started the car. The evening opened out ahead of them, ordinary, full, imperfect, and entirely theirs. End of Part 5. End of the Weight of a Policy.